Chapter 301. It's her. Lu Xiaoqiao was startled. Because of the competition for courtesan belle, she naturally knew the famous peers in Qing and Prefecture. She even had a general understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. In fact, everyone had a copy of such information in their hands. Therefore, she had always been very concerned about Zhang Zimo, a very threatening opponent. This kind of attention, after learning that she did not attend any banquets and did not seem to have any intention of competing for the title of courtesan belle, gradually decreased, and all their energy was focused on Lu Yi. However, they still did not dare to underestimate her, because they all knew very well that the other party was the most unstable factor in this courtesan belle competition. Therefore, seeing Zhang Zimo on such an occasion tonight, Lu Xiaoqiao would naturally think more. Could it be that she had changed her mind and decided to fight again in these last days? Having missed the best time, this hope was very slim. Unless, Lu Xiaoqiao was not the only one who had this idea. Lu Yi also did not expect that Zhang Zimo, who never attended such banquets, would actually come tonight. After greeting her and saying a few words, she felt uneasy for no reason. After Lu Yi left, Zhang Zimo looked around and found that all the quiet places in the garden were occupied. She could only pull Xiao Cui to a relatively quiet table, planning to sit for a while and then leave. This would be considered as completing the task given to her by the procuress. Over there. Looks like Miss Zimo? Doesn't she never attend such occasions? How could it be? It really is her. I haven't seen Miss Zimo for a long time. It said that she has no intention of competing for courtesan belle. Could the rumors be wrong? However, even if she wants to compete, it's too late, isn't it? Although Zhang Zimo rarely appeared in front of people these days, the popularity she had accumulated would not fade so easily. On the contrary, because of the recent silence, there were more people paying attention to her tonight. I didn't expect Miss Zimo to come too. Looking from afar, a trace of surprise appeared on Yang Yanzhou's face. Wan Qilyang cared about other things and said, just in time. After hearing what Yanzhou said just now, I also want to buy a painting from Miss Zimo. I wonder if she will give me face and give me a discount of a few dozen taels of silver. After all, I am not as rich as brother Yanzhou. As they chatted and laughed, they walked over. Zhang Zimo naturally didn't know what the people in the distance were thinking. Looking at Xiao Cui, who was still frowning, she finally couldn't bear to let her worry, so she whispered a few words in her ear. Xiao Cui was startled. Then, a look of joy appeared on her face. Miss, is what you said true? In the future we... Shoo, lower your voice. Zhang Zimo gestured for her to keep quiet. This news couldn't be announced yet. Hee, I got it. The worry on Xiao Cui's face disappeared. Since her mistress had already redeemed herself, what was the point of competing for the title of top courtesan? Wherever her mistress went, she would go. She wouldn't have to be afraid anymore. She suddenly thought of something and said, by the way, miss, Xiao Cui has something to give you. Although the young miss no longer needed that thing, Xiao Cui still planned to give it to her. As for whether the young miss wanted to keep it or let her return it, it was up to the young miss. What is it? While Zhang Zimo was confused, she saw that after Xiao Cui searched around in her arms, her face changed, and she immediately became flustered. Oh no, miss, I lost that thing. Xiao Cui stood up in a panic. Just as she was about to search along the path she came from, she suddenly saw a thin booklet lying a few steps away. She let out a long sigh of relief. Just as she was about to run over and pick it up, a pair of slender hands appeared in her line of sight. Seeing a woman pick up the booklet, Xiao Cui quickly ran over and said, I just dropped it. Oh, just because you say it's yours, it's yours. Do you have any proof? The woman glanced at Xiao Cui and flipped it open. Give it back. Xiao Cui was about to reach out and grab it, but she was pushed by the maid next to the woman. She took a few steps back and almost fell. Whose maid is this? She's so unruly. The maid glared at Xiao Cui and stood in front of the woman. The woman naturally recognized that the young girl in front of her was the maid of Zhang Zimo, the top artist of the Jadeite courtyard. Otherwise, with her status, she wouldn't bother with a little maid. But who told her to be Zhang Zimo's maid? Last year, during the top courtesan selection, a certain young master who had always favored her turned to support Zhang Zimo at the last moment, causing her to lose the top courtesan selection. In this line of work, stealing a person's job was like killing their parents. She still remembered this hatred to this day. Every dog has its day. This year, her top courtesan selection was already in the bag, but the other party. The woman sneered in her heart. Did she still have a chance to turn the tables? Opening the booklet in her hand, the sneer on her face became even more intense. Did she think she could turn the tables with a few lousy poems? She casually recited the poem on the first page. There is a beauty in the north, peerless and independent. One glance can topple a city, and another can topple a country. Better not know how to topple a city or a country. A beauty is hard to find. After reciting the poem, the sneer on her face disappeared. She felt some regret in her heart. Even if a renowned courtesan didn't have attainments in poetry, how could they not have the ability to appreciate beauty? This poem describing a beauty, although the style was irregular, there were no flowery words, no detailed descriptions, and the language was simple and monotonous. But why did the image of a beauty that could topple a country appear in her mind? May I ask Miss Hu, can I take a look at this poem? A voice came from behind her. Yang Yanzhou walked over with large strides and looked at her as he asked. Young Master Yang. Hu Ning looked at Yang Yanzhou and didn't know what to say. She had just picked up this booklet from the ground. How would she know who wrote this poem? Miss Hu, can I take a look at this item? Yang Yanzhou once again pointed at the booklet in her hand and asked. Hu Ning nodded her head in a daze and handed over the booklet in her hand. Yang Yanzhou was the head of the scholars in Qing'an Prefecture. He wasn't someone she could offend. Song of a Beauty. I didn't think that there would still be someone who could write a folk song poem of this level. I wonder who the scholar who wrote this poem is? Can you introduce me to him? Yang Yanzhou's face showed an expression of admiration as he looked at Hu Ninger and asked. This poem was written for our family's mistress. Following the arrival of Yang Yanzhou and Lu Xiaoqiao, the crowd gradually gathered towards them. Xiao Chui's voice was blocked out by the crowd. Hu Ninger's expression changed a few times before she suddenly smiled and said, To tell you the truth, this poem was given to Ninger by a young master. That young master specifically told me not to reveal his identity. I hope young Master Yang doesn't take offense. Her face carried just the right amount of apology, as if there really was something that was difficult to say. Anyone who saw this would not have any thoughts of blaming her. This song of a beauty was completely different from those obscene lyrics and songs. There wasn't a single word of description in the entire poem, and it left one's imagination running wild. Even as a woman, Hu Ning couldn't wait to meet the beauty in the poem. If this poem could be publicized by Yang Yanzhou, it would greatly increase her reputation. Xing Zumo, I'll reluctantly accept this gift. Hu Ning muttered inwardly, and the smile on her face became even more radiant. Devastatingly beautiful? How beautiful must this woman be? Even the legendary beauty Bao Si can't be compared to her. She only listened to a few lines of the poem, yet she's so eager to meet the beauty in the poem. In the next few days, I'm afraid the Golden Phoenix Pavilion's door will be trampled to pieces. Miss Ning Er's title of Courtesan Belle is in the bag. If the Golden Phoenix Pavilion invests more resources, she might even be able to fight for the title of Courtesan Belle. Hu Ning Er's heart was blooming with joy as she listened to the crowd's discussions. Tonight's surprise was simply too big for her. At this time, Yang Yanzhou flipped to a page, and in the next moment, a puzzled voice sounded in her ears. The clouds think of her clothes, the flowers think of her face, the spring breeze caresses the balustrade with dew. If we don't meet in the jadeite courtyard, we will meet under the moonlight on the Yaotai Pavilion. May I know when Miss Ning transferred to the jadeite courtyard from the Golden Phoenix Pavilion? Jadeite courtyard? Hu Ning Er's expression froze. Chapter 302. Miss Ning transferred to the jadeite courtyard? I've never heard of this. I just saw her at the Golden Phoenix Pavilion yesterday. Then what does this line, if not in the jadeite courtyard, we will meet under the moonlight at the Jade Pavilion mean? Could it be that this poem isn't written for Miss Ning? Hearing Yang Yanzhou recite another poem, the crowd was stunned for a moment before they started to discuss among themselves. These famous courtesans didn't have to stay in the same place for the rest of their lives. It was common for them to transfer to another brothel, but this would only happen to slightly famous courtesans like the top 10 courtesans. Unless the brothel keeper was a fool, she wouldn't let go of such a cash cow. Obviously, Hu Ning was the Golden Phoenix Pavilion's brothel keeper's cash cow, and the possibility of her transferring to another brothel was minuscule. With this, the crowd couldn't help but think of another possibility. Could it be that this poem wasn't written for her? If that was the case, then the song of a beauty that stunned the crowd just now wasn't written for her, right? Thinking about it, although Hu Ning could be considered beautiful, it was too much of an exaggeration to say that she was devastatingly beautiful. Even she herself wouldn't dare to admit it. As for the second poem, the rosy clouds are her clothes, the flowers are her face, the spring breeze caresses the railings, the dewdrops moisten the flowers, making them more vibrant. Such a beauty, if not in the jadeite courtyard, we will meet under the moonlight at the Jade Pavilion. This was also a poem praising a beauty. Compared to it, the soft waist and soft limbs, skillful in singing and dancing, that had been spreading like wildfire these days could only be considered as obscene lyrics. The previous beauty song and the poem just now were definitely a rare masterpiece. It was unknown which great talent had written them. Some people even felt that it was a great waste to use such a poem on a few courtesans in a brothel. If not in the jadeite courtyard. The jadeite courtyard. Finally, someone came back to his senses and murmured, "These two poems are both about a girl in the jade courtyard. Could it be Chen Miao Miao who has been in the limelight recently?" In the crowd, Chen Miao Miao's face was blushing. She didn't dare to admit that these two poems were written for her even if she had 10 guts. She knew herself. If she was really like what was written in the poems, how could the title of the top artist in the Jade's courtyard fall on Zhang Zimo's head? After a familiar figure appeared in her mind, Chen Miao Miao finally understood. Of course, there was no lack of people in the crowd who understood the situation. After a short moment of commotion, the place suddenly fell silent again. Everyone turned their gazes and looked at the woman who was not far away. The woman was comforting the servant girl who was on the verge of tears. From afar she heard the servant girl say, "Miss, she snatched the poem that Li Li gave you." Li Li. In the circle of scholars in Qing and Fu, whenever these 3 words were mentioned, their hearts would tremble. As a result, those with the surname Li did not dare to let outsiders call them young master. Since it was that person, then all of this could be explained. Thinking of the rumors between him and Lady Zimo, everyone immediately understood. Yang Yanzhou held the thin book in his hand. From time to time, voices could be heard. There is a beautiful person like a clear breeze. Adding 1 point is too long, subtracting 1 point is too short. Her form, like a graceful swan like a swimming dragon. Wan Qilyang stood beside Yang Yanzhou in a daze and murmured, "Bullying, this is too much." Every single one of them could be used as the finale, enough for an outdated courtesan to make a comeback. Yet they were tossed out so casually, and there were so many of them at once. In this way, how could Lu Xiaoqiao and Lu Yi fight for first place? Hu Ning's face was pale, and she almost lost her footing. She forced a smile and said, "I was just joking just now. These poems were naturally not written for Ning. I picked it up on the ground just now. I'm afraid someone lost it." Yang Yanzhou and Wan Qilyang only had eyes for the book and did not pay attention to Hu Ning at all. The latter moved her gaze away from the book and exclaimed, "To think that someone could reach the pinnacle of folk song poems, songs of Chu, and poetry. I'm afraid we will not be able to catch up even if we spend our entire lives." Suddenly he asked in confusion, "Luo Shen Fu?" It compares the woman one admires to a goddess. The words are beautiful but not impetuous, and the portrayal is already at the pinnacle. It is fascinating. But where is this Luo River? I've never heard of it before. Could it be made up? Yang Yanzhou's gaze did not move away from the book. He said, "Luo River is the ancient name of Yuan River. Last night, you and I were boating on Yuan River. Moreover, the name Luo Shen is commonly seen in ancient books. How could it be made up?" Wan Qilyang naturally knew that his knowledge was far from Yang Yanzhou's. If he said there was, then there must be. "It's him, it can only be him," Yang Yanzhou murmured. A hint of unwillingness appeared on his face, but he then shook his head with a wry smile. He had already given up on the idea of comparing himself to him in this life. At this time, the crowd slowly parted to form a path. Zheng Zimo and Xiao Chui walked over. Yang Yanzhou walked over and said, "Miss Zimo, I have a request. Can I make a copy of the poem book in my hand?" In fact, even now, Zheng Zimo did not know what was written in the book. She was also very confused. When did Li Yi give this to her? Why didn't Xiao Chui tell her? Also, why was Hu Ninger's face so pale? Why were these people looking at her like that? All the mysteries were contained in the thin book that Yang Yanzhou handed over. She took the book and flipped it open. 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages. As the former top courtesan, her attainments in poetry were naturally not bad. Gradually, her pretty face began to blush inexplicably. Were these poems all talking about her? Was she really that good? Looking at those extremely extravagant descriptions, she could not help but think of the scene that night. She only felt that even the roots of her ears were beginning to burn. Outside the crowd, after Zhu Qing came back to her senses, she turned to the few young people beside her and asked, "How is it? Are you confident?" Confident? Those poems have already praised that woman to the heavens. Among all the scholars in the Jing kingdom, who would dare say the word confident? The leading young man shook his head. This was already beyond the scope of their competition. It was better to save some face. In the field, Lu Xiaoqiao and Lu Yi looked at each other and saw the deep helplessness in each other's eyes. The two of them had fought for so long, but in the end, it was still like drawing water with a sieve. And the few people who had hopes of becoming the top courtesan, including Chen Miao Miao, all looked at Hu Ninger with incomparably fierce eyes, as if they wanted to skin her alive. They did not want to compete for the top courtesan anymore. Damn Hu Ning, why did she have to recite poems for no reason? Sensing their malice, Hu Ninger's face became even paler. She had probably become everyone's public enemy. Chapter 303. Stupid girl, why didn't you tell me such an important thing earlier? As soon as the two returned to the Jade Courtyard and closed the door, Zheng Zimo slapped Xiao Chui's butt hard. Xiao Chui covered her butt and said pitifully, "I was worried that Miss wouldn't agree." She secretly stuck out her tongue and didn't care at all. Who asked them to gossip all day long? This time, she finally shut everyone's mouth. Don't make your own decisions in the future. Zheng Zimo glared at her angrily. At this moment, she secretly rejoiced in her heart. Fortunately, she had redeemed her freedom before this. If it had been a few hours later, her mother wouldn't have agreed to let her leave. "Miss, what should we do now?" Xiao Chui rubbed her butt and asked. "What else can we do?" Zheng Zimo glared at her and said, "Hurry up and pack up. We'll leave from the back door." "Where to?" Xiao Chui asked doubtfully. "Let's get out of here first." Zheng Zimo replied and began to pack up. She was entangled by those people and didn't rush back until the end of the banquet. She had to leave as soon as possible. Otherwise, when tonight's event spread, she wouldn't be able to leave even if she wanted to. During the top beauty competition, such information was extremely sensitive. A certain scholar offered a poem to the top girl. A certain young man spent a lot of money to win a beauty's smile. The news spread so fast that it was hard to imagine. Within an hour, even a notice might be posted. Seeing Xiao Chui carry out a big box, Zhang Zimo said grumpily, "Pick something valuable. Don't bring anything worthless. Remember, don't forget your secret stash of money hidden under the bed." At this time, in a certain room in the attic, the madam of the Jade Courtyard was counting her little treasury. Each piece of jewelry shone with a charming radiance under the light. She counted and wiped the silver, and the smile on her old face never stopped. When Miao Miao won the title of top beauty, the future wealth would come rolling in. Mom! Suddenly, an anxious voice came from outside the door. The madam's expression changed. She hurriedly covered the things on the bed with a blanket and walked over to open the door. She frowned and asked, "Why are you panicking? Have you forgotten the rules I taught you?" "Mom, there are a lot of people at the entrance of our Jade Courtyard," the woman outside said breathlessly. "Many people?" The madam locked the door from the outside and followed her downstairs. From afar, she could hear a commotion outside the door. A few servants blocked the door from the inside, and a series of knocking sounds came from the outside. "Are these people Miao Miao's admirers?" the madam murmured. She could only think of this possibility. She strode over and said, "Hurry up and open the door. We're doing business. How can we lock our customers outside?" He kicked the legs of the servants a few times and opened the door. Seeing that the people below had gradually retreated from the hall under the persuasion of the officials, she couldn't help but feel a little relieved. Zuamo had already redeemed herself. She could leave whenever she wanted. The first thing now was to figure out what happened. If these people came every day, how could they do business? Seeing Chen Miao Miao coming in from outside, the brothel keeper hurriedly greeted her. After a while, after Chen Miao Miao told the cause and effect of the matter, the brothel keeper looked dull, her old face was pale, and her legs were weak. She held on to the wall to barely stand. In other words, they really just wanted to see Zue Mo? Someone wrote more than 10 excellent poems for Zue Mo? If she goes to compete for the top spot now, the probability of success is more than 50%. The brothel keeper closed her eyes and murmured, "Just now, she used 1,000 taels to redeem herself. Oh my God, what sin have I committed?" She seemed to see a huge mountain of gold gradually leaving her. She wanted to use a knife to cut off a piece of her heart. She was filled with regret and then she fainted. Zue Mo redeemed herself? Hearing this news, Chen Miao Miao's face immediately filled with ecstasy. Since she no longer belonged to this line of work, no matter how famous she had no right to compete for the top courtesan. On the contrary, because of her, the jadeite courtyard became more famous. Perhaps she could also benefit a little. Tonight, the jadeite courtyard was destined to be the liveliest place in Qing'an Prefecture. No one knew that just as the gate of the jadeite courtyard was blocked so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through, two handsome young masters carrying bags walked out from the back door of the jadeite courtyard. They went around to the front door and swaggered past the crowd. Chapter 304. It's been 6 days. Xiaofan sat in the yard and habitually counted her fingers and muttered to herself. Son-in-law and second miss had been walking for 6 days. They should be arriving in the capital soon. Yesterday, the lantern festival had passed. Miss took her to the street to see the lanterns. When they came back, they bought a few beautiful lanterns to hang in the room. If son-in-law was here, he wouldn't have to spend money to buy them. The person who sold the lanterns said that as long as he guessed the riddles, he could take the lanterns back. Son-in-law was very good at guessing riddles. He would definitely lose money. There was some noise outside. She heard it in the yard just now. It seemed that Uncle Fong and the others went to the brothel yesterday when Aunt was not at home. When they came out, they were caught on the spot by the aunties who came back from the temple. Last night, the house was noisy all night. Early in the morning, they could see the brooms raised high in the yard next door. A figure suddenly jumped in from the door. Fong made a shushing gesture to Xiaofan and whispered, "I'll hide here. Don't tell your aunt." As he spoke, he quickly flashed into the storage room. Xiaofan sighed. Uncle Fong was such an honest person. Why did he like to go to such an unscrupulous place? She pouted in the direction of the storage room to Aunt Fong, who was chasing from outside. Lying on the rocking chair, it was very comfortable. No wonder son-in-law liked to lie on it before. There was a scream from the room. A figure rushed out of the room and crawled out of the yard. Aunt Fong hurriedly chased after him with a broom in her hand. In the yard next to Rui Square, several long tables were put together. On the table was a huge canvas. A woman in a humble dress with a wooden hairpin in her hair was holding a brush in her hand. The tip of the brush was moving on the canvas. The painting in front of her was more than half finished. The scenery was vivid. A tall tower stood on Lonely Mountain. Huge waves thousands of feet high swept from the front, as if they were going to drown the whole mountain. This was a scene from The Legend of the White Snake, which was the most popular play in recent days. It was called The Flooding of Jinshan. The mountain was so majestic that it looked like it was about to come out of the canvas. The water was so strong that it looked like it was going to surge out of the canvas. From afar, it was very shocking. Wan Ruoqing walked out of the room, shook her head, and said, "You can keep your composure. There are people out there who are willing to pay 3,000 taels of silver just to see you. Even a portrait can be sold for more than 100 taels of silver. Why do you work so hard for a few dozen copper coins?" "It's different." After standing for a long time, Zheng Zumo twisted her sore waist and said, "I don't care. You promised to take me in anyway. You can't go back on your word now. Your fame has already spread out of Qing'an Prefecture. Everyone knows about the goddess of Luo Shui. The Song of a Beauty and the Ode of the Goddess of Luo have been passed around and copied by countless people. It is said that the price of the paper in Qing'an Prefecture is 10% higher than usual." Wan Ruoqing looked at her and teased. Who would have thought that the goddess of Jade Pool and goddess of Luo Shui, that everyone in Qing'an Prefecture knows about, is such a scoundrel? What goddess of Luo Shui? It's all his fault. A trace of embarrassment appeared on Zhang Zimo's face. Every time she heard others recite these lines, she couldn't help but think of that night when she was honest with him. Once the Luo Xinfu was released, her fame grew even greater than before. The matter of the #1 scholar of Qing and Fu composing a poem for a beauty also became a legend. As long as it was a woman, there was no one who did not envy her. Those poems would definitely be passed down. Whenever it was mentioned in the future, Zhang Zimo's name would also appear. She had truly become famous throughout the ages, but she just wanted to live a peaceful life in the future. After this incident, this wish became an extravagant hope. She had to cover her face even when she went out, afraid of being recognized. How could there be a peaceful life? As for the culprit who caused all of this, he didn't know where he was currently enjoying himself. If you don't like it, you might as well give me that book of poems. Wan Ruoqing looked at her and said with a smile, I'm afraid you can't bear to part with it. Without that book of poems, our goddess of Luo Shui won't have something to hold and smile at every night. And you're talking about me? I don't know who it is that has to take out that sky lamp to look at every 2 days. Zhang Zimo's pretty face blushed slightly, but she didn't lose out at all. An imperceptible trace of envy appeared in Wan Ruoqing's eyes. She changed the topic and said, the top 10 courtesans of Upper Yuan Night have already been selected. Don't you want to know who the courtesans are this year? Who else can it be? It's just that the battle for the first place is a little more intense, but it's just a competition between Lu Xiaoqiao and Lu Yi. Lu Yi wants to surpass Lu Xiaoqiao, who has the support of Qing and Scholar, with just a few businessmen. I'm afraid it won't be so easy for her to get the first place. As for the others, it's probably those old faces. Zhang Zimo added a few more strokes on the canvas and said indifferently. Wan Ruoqing nodded and said, Indeed, Lu Yi lost to Lu Xiaoqiao by a small margin in the end, and could only settle for second place. In addition to the two of them, there are 4 other courtesans who are still famous. The Jade Courtyard lost you and gained Chen Miao Miao. Although it's only the last place with your fame, the Jade Courtyard won't have any big loss this time. There was a sentence that Wan Ruoqing didn't say. Although Lu Xiaoqiao was this year's champion, in terms of popularity, she was far less than Zhang Zimo. If she didn't redeem herself, even if she didn't do anything, she could still firmly take the position of champion. There was a knock on the door behind her. Wan Ruoqing walked over and opened the door. When she saw the person, she couldn't help but be slightly stunned. Zhang Zimo, why do you have to do this? A voice containing too many emotions suddenly sounded. The Jade Courtyard's madam ran into the courtyard. Looking at Zhang Zimo, who was dressed in plain clothes and didn't even have a decent piece of jewelry on her, tears fell down. Mom, why are you here? Zhang Zimo was shocked. She looked back and only breathed a sigh of relief when she found that no one had followed her. The madam grabbed her hand and said excitedly, Zhang Zimo, come back with me. What's wrong with the Jade Courtyard? There's good food and drinks. Even if we have to serve you like an ancestor, it's fine. You're already living a life of happiness. Why do you have to suffer like this? Looking at the madam's tearful and distressed expression, Zhang Zimo was a bit amused and said, Mom, you don't need to persuade me. Since I'm out, I won't go back. Oh right. Remember to pick tender ginger in the future. Old ginger is too stinging, you can't stand it. The method of using old ginger to make people cry was taught to her by her mother. She wanted to use this method to gain sympathy, but she used the wrong person. Hearing her words, the madam wiped away her tears and sighed. Sigh, you heartless woman. I didn't provide you with good food or good drink. Now that you've grown up, the Jade's Courtyard can't accommodate the goddess of Luo Shui anymore. You really don't plan to go back? After complaining for a while, the madam asked tentatively for the last time. I'm not going back. Zhang Zimo smiled and said with absolute certainty. A trace of annoyance appeared on the madam's face. She turned and walked out, saying as she walked, All right, the child has grown up, I can't keep her anymore. I just hope you don't forget the sisters in the courtyard. If there's a chance, support them more, and that will be your repayment to me. This time, she didn't expect to invite Zhang Zimo back. Although she was no longer in the Jade Courtyard, because of her great rise in fame, the Jade Courtyard's reputation also spread. These days, business was very good. If she hadn't been so heartless before and turned to support Chen Miao Miao, even if she couldn't invite her back, she would still be able to get more benefits. But now, she could only hope that Zhang Zumo would remember the past and help the girls in the building, which was also helping her in disguise. Finally out. Seeing the madam's figure disappear, Zhang Zumo's heart relaxed for no reason. Finally here. Looking at the city walls that were much taller and more majestic than Qing and Prefecture City, Li Yi let out a long breath and relaxed. Chapter 305. Of course, Li Yi wasn't the only one who relaxed. When they reached the foot of the city, the 11 guards nimbly dismounted. After traveling back and forth for half a month, they finally returned to the capital. Lu Rui jumped down from the carriage and looked at the most prosperous city in the Jing kingdom. Outside the city gates, there were people weaving in and out, and there was an endless stream of carriages and horses. It was far more prosperous than Qing and Prefecture. Was this the capital? Behind her, the guards looked at her with respect. During the journey, no one dared to look at her as a weak girl. The young master really had the foresight to bring a girl like this along. Just as they were facing dozens of bandits as if they were facing a great enemy, they only saw the light of a sword flash and a white shadow weave through the crowd of bandits. In a moment, all the bandits could only lie on the ground and wail. Those with power were always respected by others. Even though she was a girl, these proud guards were willing to lower their heads. Elderly ordered, Li Zhang, send 2 people back to the mansion first and tell the news of the young master's return. A moment later, 2 people handed their horses over to their companions and galloped into the city. Galloping on horseback was not allowed in the city, so galloping was much faster. Young master, let's go, Elder Li said with a smile. Li Yi nodded and re-entered the carriage. The carriage slowly moved forward. Through the gap, he looked at the green stone slabs that were moving backward. His heart was very calm. As they neared the capital, the strange feeling in his heart gradually dissipated. It wouldn't be long before it completely disappeared. This made Li Yi feel that this trip was not in vain. On the way, Uncle Li had already told him everything about the current situation of the Li family. The old master of the Li family had made great contributions during the founding of the kingdom. He was promoted to a county magistrate and established the original foundation for the Li family. Decades ago, the Li family was considered prominent in the capital. However, with the passing of the old master, the descendants of the Li family did not make enough contributions to maintain their titles. The titles were reduced from generation to generation until the old master passed away. The Li family gradually declined until they were almost kicked out of the ranks of nobles. As the eldest son of the direct line of descent, Li Yi's father was supposed to inherit the Li family's business. However, for a woman, he gave up everything and left for a faraway place. After the previous head of the family passed away, the heir to the title could only be the second son of the direct line of descent. Thus, the title became a county magistrate. Of course, other than the title, he also had an official position in the court. He was the pillar of the Li family. The carriage slowly entered the city. The green stone paved street was at least twice the size of the main street of Qing and Manor. Even so, the street was slightly crowded. There was an endless stream of people and carriages. After the carriage traveled for about 15 minutes, the number of people on the road gradually decreased. The houses on both sides of the street became more and more imposing. Uncle Li shouted excitedly, "We're here!" The carriage stopped. Li Yi and Lu Rui disembarked. "Young master, the old madam is already waiting in the inner hall. Let's go quickly." The guard who had left earlier walked out of the crowd and said, "Young master, come with me. We'll go see the old madam first." Uncle Li walked over and said, "Young master, come with me. We'll go see the old madam first." Li Yi was a junior, so he naturally couldn't let the elders welcome him at the door. Under the confused and curious gazes of the servants, he stepped into the Li family's front door. Although the Li family had declined, the house was still imposing. Li Yi didn't know how many corridors and moon doors they passed through before they arrived in front of a spacious hall. Before they entered the hall, a trembling figure walked out of the house with the help of a walking stick. "My poor child." The old madam with a face full of wrinkles and white hair shook off the support of the servant girls and walked unsteadily to Li Yi. She held his hand as tears streamed down her face. Li Yi didn't know what to do with this sudden scene. He could only let the old madam hold him. Seeing her crying tears of joy, Li Yi sighed softly and said with difficulty, "Grandmother, I'm back." The old madam didn't hide her emotions at all. It made Li Yi think of the old madam in another world. His heart couldn't help but be moved. It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back. The old madam used her sleeve to wipe away the tears on her face. She looked up and down at Li Yi and murmured, "It can't be wrong, it can't be wrong. He's practically carved out of the same mold as Ming Han. He's a child of my Li family." As if remembering something sad, the old madam's mood became low again. My poor child Ming Han. In Li Yi's memory, he hadn't seen the father of the original owner of his body mention anything about the family. However, every year during the Double Yang festival, he would get drunk and say things like, "Mother, I'm unfilial. I've let you down," with tears streaming down his face. It could be seen how important the old madam was in his heart. Along the way, he learned from Uncle Li that the old madam loved her eldest son the most. In the past 20 years, she often cried late at night and became ill from worry. Her health had always been poor. Suddenly, the old madam seemed to notice something. She suddenly looked at Lu Rui, who was standing beside Li Yi. Her eyes lit up and she let go of Li Yi. She hurriedly walked over and held her hand. "Is this my granddaughter-in-law? You're so pretty. My grandson has good taste. Come, let grandmother take a good look." Hearing the old madam say, "granddaughter-in-law," the guard named Li Zheng's expression changed drastically. A few days ago, he was dragged by the collar and thrown out of the courtyard by this heroine because he called her second madam. Even now, his butt was still aching. If the old madam was thrown out, she would lose her life. However, the scene that he was worried about did not happen. The old madam held Lu Rui's hand. The more she looked at her, the more satisfied she was. The wrinkles on her face smoothed out. She took off a bracelet from her wrist and said, "This is the first time I'm meeting my granddaughter-in-law. I don't have anything good to give you. Take this bracelet. From now on, you're a member of the Li family." Mississippi Lu, who was always fearless and could even poke a hole in the sky when she was angry, seemed to be at a loss. She looked at Li Yi with a pleading gaze. Li Yi could only walk over and explain, "Grandmother, the madam is not feeling well. She couldn't stand the fatigue of the long journey, so she didn't come with us. This is my wife's sister. Sisters are like a family. It's the same, it's the same." But the old madam didn't seem to hear Li Yi's words. She put the bracelet on Lu Rui's wrist with a smile. "What do you mean by it's the same?" Li Yi stood there in a daze. He was speechless for a moment. Uncle Li, who was standing at the side, watched the old madam put the bracelet on the wrist of the madam's second daughter. His eyes widened and his face was full of disbelief. This bracelet was put on by the old madam when she married the master. It had always been passed down to the first wife of the Li family. The second wife begged the old madam for decades, but the old madam didn't give it to her. Could it be that she was so happy at this moment that she forgot about it? Chapter 306. The Li family obviously had a tradition of valuing females over males. After seeing her precious granddaughter-in-law, old mistress completely forgot about the existence of Li Yi, her real grandson. She pulled Lu Rui's hand and walked into the house. Old mistress's enthusiasm far exceeded Li Yi's imagination. At this moment, he could only follow behind them. However, a few maidservants beside old mistress stole a glance at this young master whom they were meeting for the first time. After being discovered by Li Yi, they turned their heads away with blushing faces. There were quite a number of people in the hall. When old mistress pulled Lu Rui in, the crowd happened to come out to welcome them. "Good, good." A middle-aged man in his 30s strode over to Li Yi. He patted his shoulder hard and said a few words with a face full of good. Li Yi felt some pain in his shoulder, but when he saw the man's slightly red eyes, he didn't argue with him. "Young master, this is second master. You should call him second uncle," Uncle Li reminded him. There were 3 sons and 1 daughter in the direct line of descent in the Li family. The eldest son was not around, so the second son inherited the family business. This meant that the person in front of him was the master of the Li family, the uncle of the original owner of this body. "Second uncle," Li Yi bowed and greeted. Perhaps it was because they shared the same bloodline, even though it was the first time they met, he couldn't help but feel a sense of familiarity with these people. "This is third master," Uncle Li said as he pointed to another younger man. Li Yi bowed again. This third uncle only nodded slightly and didn't appear to be very enthusiastic. Li Yi didn't mind this. Uncle Li had told him long ago that the third master of the Li family had a mild temper. He treated everyone like this and didn't have any ill intentions. There were second uncles and third uncles. Naturally, there were second aunts and third aunts. As long as one was born in a big family, which man did not have at least one or two concubines? Li Yi recognized a circle of people, but in the end, he only remembered the most important ones. Most of the womenfolk were circling around Rui. Li Yi saw a woman point at the bracelet that old mistress had just given her. She exclaimed with an exaggerated expression, "This bracelet looks so familiar. It looks like the one that old mistress is wearing." Then, everyone's eyes were glued to the bracelet on Lu Rui's wrist. Some were amazed, some were envious, and some were jealous. Li Yi immediately knew that old mistress might have given a big gift. These two children have been on the road for a few days. I'm sure they're exhausted. They've met everyone they need to meet. Let them go and have a good rest. If there's anything else, we'll talk about it at night. After a while, the old mistress issued an order. Out of all virtues, filial piety was the most important. The ancients had deeply implemented this traditional virtue. In this family, the men made the decisions for external matters. As for the domestic matters, old mistress was the one in charge. Rui, come with grandmother for a while. When Li Yi was escorted away by a few maidservants, he saw old mistress holding Mississippi Lu's hand and happily walking to the back hall. Although this was still a society that valued appearance, and it was easier to be liked by others if one was beautiful, Li Yi felt that the way old mistress looked at him was not quite normal. Just as he was feeling puzzled, he was brought into a room by a few maidservants. A pretty maidservant said crisply, "Young master, this servant will help you bathe." It had been a tiring journey and he was really tired. It would be nice to have a comfortable hot bath. Li Yi took off his outer robe and suddenly felt that something was wrong. He turned around and saw that a few maidservants were standing behind him, looking at him with red faces. There was clearly some kind of light in their eyes. Li Yi did not have the habit of being surrounded by people when he was bathing. He just wanted to have a good bath alone. After the bathtub and hot water were prepared, he sent them out. Lying comfortably in the bathtub, he began to miss Xiaofan. At this time, if only he could have a little maidservant's hands massaging his shoulders. How good would it be? He had arrived at the capital, and the favor was almost repaid. When old mistress's birthday was over, he could say goodbye. Rui and Xiaofan were still waiting for him at home. No matter how big the Li family's business was, it was not his turn to inherit it. Moreover, he was really not interested in it. Coming to visit the Li family was just the obsession of the child in his dream. Li Yi had a premonition that when he dreamed again, he would not be able to see him. Just as Li Yi was lying comfortably in the bathtub, a few maidservants sat in the corridor by the door and whispered, "That is the young master." It seems that the story of the young master running away from home 20 years ago is true. A maidservant with two buns exclaimed. A slightly older maidservant whispered, "Of course it is true. The elders in the manor all know that the young master ran away with a woman. Otherwise, how could the second master become the master? I heard from old mistress that the young master looks exactly like the young master. I don't know if it is true." A round-faced maidservant murmured, "It is true, it is true. There is a portrait of the young master in old mistress's temple. I have seen it before. The person in the portrait is very similar to the young master. Old mistress always cries when she looks at the portrait. It should be the young master. The young master is really handsome. Although he looks thin, when he takes off his clothes, he is really well built. Say, who do you think old mistress will send to serve the young master?" In these large families, the maidservants who served the young master would usually become concubines. Although it was not to say that they would fly up the branches and become phoenixes, they would be able to live a life of luxury. Therefore, becoming the young master's maidservant was the dream of most maidservants. Hearing this, one of them sneered, "Stop dreaming. I think the young master doesn't have any feelings for us at all. Otherwise, he wouldn't have driven us all out just now. Even young mistress's second daughter is so beautiful. I think young mistress is also a first-class beauty. Will the young master like us?" The maidservant who spoke just now was obviously disappointed. She changed the topic and said, "Old mistress likes the second daughter very much. She even gave the jade bracelet on her hand to her. I heard that the jade bracelet is only passed down to the first wife of the Li family. Second mistress has always wanted the jade bracelet, but old mistress never gave it to her. This time, second mistress will definitely be unhappy. When they had nothing to do, they would secretly gossip about their masters. It was probably one of the few entertainment for these servants. Especially when there was no one around, the topic would also be bolder. At this time, in a hall at the back of the house, an angry woman pointed at Li Mingzi, the current head of the Li family, and said, "Look, look, how biased she is. Can that bracelet be given away so casually? Does she want that outsider woman to be the first wife of the Li family?" I knew it. I knew it. After so many years, the old lady is still thinking about her eldest son. She keeps calling him good grandson. Does she still care about us? She can give away the family heirloom bracelets today, and she can give away the Li family tomorrow. Shut up. Li Mingzi suddenly pounded the table, stood up and said, "He is the only blood of my eldest brother. He is a descendant of the Li family. I owe my eldest brother too much. I can't treat this child badly. Don't say these words again." After that, he directly flicked his sleeves and left, leaving only the woman in the hall, cursing even louder. As soon as Li Yi woke up, he felt refreshed. It was rare that he didn't have any dreams recently. He raised his head and looked out of the window, finding that it was already dark. "Young master, old mistress asked me to take you to dinner." After knocking on the door, a clear and crisp voice was heard. Chapter 307. The Li family was really big. More importantly, the roads were all twisted and turned, and there were moon doors one after another. Li Yi was not very good at recognizing the roads. After a simple wash of his face, he was still led by a young servant girl through the house. A big family was a big family. They even had a specific place to eat. They were not like those from small villages. Wherever there was a place to squat, that was the dining hall. Just as he walked through the door, a beautiful woman in her early 30s walked over. She pulled his hand and looked him up and down. "You really are Big Brother's child. You look exactly like Big Brother when he was young." The women of the Li family had the habit of holding people's hands when they met. When they were in the mood, they might even rub their faces a few times. Li Yi's face was almost deformed by the beautiful woman's pulling, but he still forced a smile and said, "You must be Auntie. Your nephew greets Auntie." The old madam had 3 sons and 1 daughter. Based on the way she addressed him, Li Yi quickly determined the identity of the beautiful woman in front of him. The old madam's youngest daughter was also his aunt in name. "Good child, come and sit. You must be tired from the journey." The women of the Li family were also very friendly. He had been in this world for more than half a year, but this was the first time Li Yi felt like he was being welcomed by everyone. It was like he had returned home after a long journey. Of course, being touched was one thing. He knew very well that his home was in Qing and Fu, not in the capital. He was pulled by the beautiful woman to sit next to the old madam. Opposite him was Mississippi Lu, who had changed into a new set of clothes. On her wrist was a jade bracelet given to her by the old mistress, and the hairpins on her head were replaced with a pair that she had never seen before. She just sat there quietly, and the butterfly wings on the hairpins fluttered slowly. One look and one could tell that it was worth a lot of money. The sword that never left her side was nowhere to be found. After not seeing her for a while, she had changed from a peerless heroine to a lady of a noble family. Needless to say, this must be the credit of the old mistress. Only the old grandma's family was eating with them, and they controlled the core power of the Li family. Besides second uncle and third uncle's family that he had met in the morning, there was also this aunt who kept asking questions. At the end of the table, a child stared at Li Yi with wide eyes. He was very curious that this stranger he had never seen before could sit next to the old grandma. It was said that in a wealthy family, one should not talk while eating. This was the most basic rule, but Li Yi found that this rule did not apply to the Li family. The beautiful woman beside him kept asking him questions, and even the old grandma would occasionally add a few words. Of course, most of the questions were about his life these years, but most of them were about the father that he had never met. Fortunately, the strange dreams he had these days were probably the memories hidden in the depths of this body. It was easy for him to answer. He was only telling the truth, but the old grandma and the beautiful woman listened with tears in their eyes. "Your father has never told you about the Li family?" The old grandma rubbed her eyes and asked without batting an eyelid. Li Yi shook his head. This was the truth. Ever since he was young, no one had said a word to him about the Li family in the capital. The old grandma sighed and said sadly, "That year, in order to separate them, the old master almost caused your mother's death. He still hates us." Li Yi did not know that there was such a thing. No wonder in his memory. His father was always brooding over his mother's death. It seemed that the reason he did not want to talk about the Li family was mostly because of this. Not wanting the old grandma to be too sad, the beautiful woman quickly changed the topic and asked, "I heard from Butler Li that Little Ear is now a county lieutenant, and it was personally conferred by the emperor?" With regards to this form of address, Li Yi could not react for a moment. Mississippi Lu, who was sitting opposite him, almost spat out the soup in her mouth. She patted her chest and looked at Li Yi with a mocking gaze. "It is the emperor's favor." Li Yi could only nod his head and say, "Since you have received the emperor's favor, you should be more diligent. You have passed the imperial examinations at such a young age, which shows that you are very talented. Why did you not participate in the imperial examinations these past few years?" The middle-aged man sitting opposite the beautiful woman put down his chopsticks and looked at Li Yi. Without waiting for Li Yi to answer, he spoke again. "Any officials of the 7th rank and above will be promoted to the imperial scholar rank. Although you have received the emperor's favor, you should also study hard and strive to become an imperial scholar as soon as possible." The moment he opened his mouth, it was as if he was admonishing Li Yi. The emperor's favor was vast, and it was often vast. Perhaps just because of a poem or an article, if it caught the emperor's eye, one could be promoted to an official position. As the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Li Mingze had seen many of these things. Every year, if not 100, there would be at least 80. Although he was curious as to what Li Yi had done to earn the emperor's praise, he was not too surprised. No matter what, he was considered the most promising one among the younger generation of the Li family. Thinking about the situation of the younger generation of the Li family, he looked at the two people sitting below him and said, "Ingjie, Inkai, the two of you should also learn from your elder brother. Inkai should listen to the teacher's teachings, don't just think about playing around all day. As for Ingjie, you will be married in a few months, don't go to the red light district anymore." Li Mingze no longer had any hope for his son. He planned to help him find an official position in the future so that he could live a stable life. Even if the Li family lost their nobility in a few decades, after so many years of business, they would not fall into a situation where they could be bullied. After Li Mingze finished speaking, a young man at the end of the table nodded his head. He felt as if he had been shot in the chest by an arrow. However, even if you gave him 10 guts, he would not dare to refute his father's words. As for the young man who was quickly shoveling food into his mouth with a wooden spoon, he only shook his round head. He was most afraid of this second uncle of his. Whatever second uncle said, he would do. Hurry up and finish eating. It was time to dig out the bird's nest in the tree in the yard. Fortunately, Li Yi was already immune to this kind of words. He even had to thank Professor Feng. He smiled and said that he would definitely study hard. In his heart, he thought that there were still 7 days until the old mistress's birthday. He wanted to have some time to experience the local customs of the capital. Then, he packed his luggage and rushed home. He heard that if he took a boat from the capital, he would arrive at Qing'an Prefecture in less than 2 days. Leaving the White Emperor in the morning among the colorful clouds, 1,000 miles of Jiangling returned in a day. This should be a scene like this, right? The meal was very harmonious. From the bits and pieces of conversation, Li Yi had a deeper understanding of the current Li family. In the capital, the political center of the Jing kingdom, a viscount was indeed not much. A random brick thrown on the street could kill 2 people. However, those families that were once prominent all had some history and would not decline so easily. This second uncle of his, other than being a viscount, was also an assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. He could be considered a high-ranking official in the court. At his age, it was very likely that he would advance further in his lifetime. As long as he did not commit any political crimes, he could at least ensure the safety of the Li family for decades. In this kind of Li family, it did not matter much whether he was there or not. It was uncomfortable to be controlled by others in everything. It was better to return to the small Qing'an prefecture and live life with Rui in that small courtyard. After sending away the servant girl arranged by the old mistress, he sat in the courtyard assigned to him. The moon on the 16th of the first month was quite round, but there were only a few stars. In the capital, that idiot Li Xian's wedding should have already ended. He did not know if he had returned or not. Her Royal Highness would probably not be able to dress up as a constable and parade around the city. Little E. As Li Yi was thinking about this, a strange voice came from the top of the wall. Chapter 308. The Li family in the capital didn't have such a treasure as a rocking chair. Li Yi leaned on the small chair and looked at the white shadow standing on the wall. He said lazily, "Little thing, is that your childhood nickname? Why haven't I heard Rui mention it before?" Rui was stunned for a moment. Then she realized that this nickname seemed to be suitable for her. She wanted to make fun of Li Yi, but she didn't expect that she would get herself into trouble. There was a trace of annoyance on her pretty face. She threw away the servant girl who was anxiously shouting for her to come down and jumped down from the wall. "When are you going back?" She walked to Li Yi and said coldly with her sword in her arms. The impolite Mississippi Lu almost never called him brother-in-law. Li Yi was already used to it. Maybe since that day when she rode on the horse and looked at him as if he was a prey and said, "Take him away." She never planned to be a well-behaved sister-in-law. "We'll leave after my birthday. If we take the boat, it will only take 2 days." Lu Rui secretly heaved a sigh of relief. She didn't ask more and changed the topic. "Madam is going to the temple outside the city to burn incense tomorrow. I'll go with her. Do you want to go?" "No." Li Yi shook his head and said decisively. "Forget it," Mississippi Lu said coldly. She tiptoed and flew to the top of the wall. The servant girl opposite her screamed again. Li Yi looked at the courtyard next door. Mississippi Lu was just 17 years old. She was just a child. Although she always pretended to be cold and mature, the nature of a young girl couldn't be changed. Rui had always protected her and the little environmental protector very well. Although Rui was good at martial arts, her mind was rarely pure. Under her cold appearance, there was a lively, playful heart. Rui knew that she didn't want to get too involved with the Li family, so she didn't come with him. Instead, she asked Rui to go with him. One reason was to protect her, and the other was to let her go out and relax. Thinking of her character, Li Yi couldn't help but worry about Rui's future. Although it was the beginning of spring after the Spring Festival, the weather started to warm up. People still had to wait until the Upper Yuan dynasty to feel the spring. The wind was gentle, the air was clear, and the sun was bright. The snow on the mountain had long melted. Today was a good day for traveling. Every year on the 17th day of the first lunar month, the cold mountain temple outside the city would hold a temple fair. Every time at this time, believers from all over the world would go up the mountain to worship. Scholars would offer some incense, praying that they would be able to graduate in the coming year. At that time, they would definitely give the Buddha a golden body. Young ladies hoped to find their Mr. Right as soon as possible. Newlyweds often went to pray to the goddess of mercy. In a feudal society, it was normal for the people to be a bit feudal. Without science, they had to believe in something. Today, the old lady was also going to the cold mountain temple to fulfill her vow. She was accompanied by a large group of maids, a dozen guards, and a heroine with superb martial arts skills. As for Li Yi, he was just going out for a walk out of boredom. The Cold Mountain Temple was naturally on Cold Mountain. It had nothing to do with the Cold Mountain Temple, which was the Cold Mountain Temple outside the city of Gusu, where the bell rings at midnight on the passenger ships. It was a short mountain no more than 100 meters above sea level. Because of the Cold Mountain Temple, it became famous. Li Yi sat in the carriage. After leaving the city, the journey began to be bumpy. He was not the only one in the carriage. The chubby brat was chewing on a juicy chicken leg, completely ignoring Li Yi. To the brat, this chicken leg was much more interesting than this elder brother who had appeared out of nowhere. If Li Yi remembered correctly, the brat in front of him was called Li Yingkai. He was the son of third uncle Li Mingyuan. This time, he had been dragged out of the house by his mother. A chicken leg was in his hands, but after a while, only a few bones were left. There was not a trace of meat left on the bones. This showed that this brat was an expert at eating chicken legs. It wasn't until he sucked all 10 of his fingers and took out a few pieces of preserved fruit to stuff into his mouth that Li Yi realized that there was a reason why this brat was so strong at such a young age. As if he felt a little embarrassed eating alone, the brat took out a piece of preserved fruit, looked at it longingly, and handed it to Li Yi. Li Yi had just seen him lick his hand like a bear's paw. Looking at the preserved fruit, he smiled and shook his head in refusal. The brat was clearly very happy. With a turn of his hand, he stuffed the preserved fruit into his own mouth. The cold mountain temple was not far. After traveling for about an hour, they arrived at the foot of Cold Mountain. The stone steps paved with bluestone extended all the way from the foot of the mountain to the summit. There were already quite a few people climbing up the stone steps. The old man's body was inconvenient, so the carriage took a flat mountain path. The brat had just eaten something, and had begun to fart non-stop in the carriage. Li Yi had no choice but to jump off the carriage and tell the driver that he planned to go up the mountain on foot. When the time came, they could meet up at the top of the mountain. The air outside was much fresher, and there was even a faint fragrance in the air. Li Yi noticed that there were many plum blossoms planted on both sides of the mountain path. In the last 2 days, the blossoms were in full bloom. Almost every young lady wearing a veil on their head had one, and the stone steps were covered in flower petals. Li Yi had not taken a few steps when he unexpectedly saw a blue-robed scholar plucking a plum blossom and inserting it into his hair. He had the bearing of a song scholar. A group of people who spoiled the scenery. A perfectly fine plum blossom had been broken into a mess, and they actually thought it was an elegant affair. Several people with flowers in their hair, who called themselves scholars, were reciting poems in front of a bare plum tree. The stone steps were not steep, but they were very long. It took Li Yi about a quarter of an hour to walk up the stone steps. When he arrived at the top of the mountain, he finally understood why he had met so many young masters and ladies along the way. The Cold Mountain Temple was not a lonely temple. In fact, the entire mountain top was under the jurisdiction of the Cold Mountain Temple, including the surrounding plum blossom forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. The young ladies with the veil toured the plum blossom forest. Low chants and light laughter could be heard from the veil. The scholars spread a plain cloth under the plum tree, sat cross-legged, raised their cups, and drank to their heart's content. When they recited a good poem, it began to rain plum blossoms. When the peach and apricot trees were still bare branches, this endless plum blossom forest was indeed a good place to go for an outing. No wonder the Cold Mountain Temple chose to hold the temple fair today. This plum blossom forest would attract many scholars and beauties. After enjoying the plum blossom forest, they would go in to worship the Bodhisattva and Buddha. Naturally, they would also offer incense. These bald donkeys really knew how to pick the right time. Naturally, Li Yi was not in the mood to enjoy the plum blossom forest alone. 2 coachmen were guarding outside the temple. They said that the old mistress had brought everyone into the temple to offer incense and to visit a famous monk. They were afraid that they would not come out for a while. Deeply educated by Marxism-Leninism, Li Yi did not believe in Buddha in the past. However, since something as unimaginable as time travel could happen, what else was impossible? He respectfully lit a stick of incense and threw a piece of silver into the merit box. Then, he leisurely strolled around the temple. He did not like crowded places, so he chose quiet paths. The antique temple also had a unique charm. It was simple and dignified, which was something that the temples of later generations did not have. After passing through a few arched doors, the people gradually became sparse. When he walked out of the last moon door, a plum blossom forest that was even more flourishing than the outside appeared in front of him. "Why are you worried, almsgiver?" An old voice came from the plum blossom forest. "Life is full of unsatisfactory things. How can I not be worried?" The young man's voice continued. Li Yi stopped and a look of interest appeared on his face. He took a few steps forward and saw the backs of an old monk and a young man in the depths of the plum blossom forest. Hearing the young man's words, the old monk casually pointed at a plum tree and smiled without saying a word. Li Yi stood behind the two and watched the scene in a daze. Could this be the legendary Zen master and the young man? The young man was enlightened and murmured, "Master, do you mean that the plum blossoms have endured the bitter winter to have the fragrance they have today? The hardship is temporary, but as long as it is endured, it will bloom in spring?" Li Yi really did not want to spoil a perfect joke. He laughed until he held his stomach and said, "No, what master means is, what are you talking about in front of the plum blossom?" "Huh." The young man suddenly turned his head and pointed at Li Yi, who was standing behind him. Just as he was about to speak, his mouth opened halfway. The expression on his face was as if he had seen a ghost. Li Yi laughed so hard that he could not straighten his back. He cupped his hands and said, Sorry, I couldn't hold it in. Please continue, continue. It was not good to spoil other people's discussion of Zen. Li Yi planned to laugh again after he left. He did not look at the old monk and the young man's reaction. He guessed that they were still pondering the meaning of his words. He turned and walked in the direction he came from. Seeing Li Yi's reaction, a look of doubt appeared on the young man's face. Seeing that Li Yi was about to walk out, he hurriedly said, "Brother, please wait." Hearing the young man's words, Li Yi's footsteps sped up. He thought to himself that this guy did not want to continue discussing Zen with the old monk. Why did he come to me? Stop. Just as he was about to walk out of the moon door, two figures suddenly flashed in front of him and blocked his way. Seeing the two men standing in front of him, Li Yi was stunned. The expression on his face was also as if he had seen a ghost. Chapter 309. Looking at the two familiar faces in front of him, Li Yi was shocked. Why were Li Xian's guards here? These two were Li Xian's godlike followers. Generally speaking, wherever Li Xian appeared, there would be their shadows. Could it be that the slightly familiar voice he heard just now was? Sure enough, when Li Yi thought of a certain possibility, an ecstatic face appeared in front of him. You've also come to the capital? There were 4 great joys in life. Rain after a long drought, meeting an old friend in a foreign land, wedding night, and getting a place in the imperial examinations. For Li Xian, wedding night was not a happy event. As the crown prince of Ningguang, his status was noble. There was no need for him to get a place in the imperial examinations. Only meeting an old friend in a foreign land could be considered an extreme joy. I'm originally from the capital. Do you know me, brother? Seeing the young man looking at him with a puzzled expression, Li Xian was a little stunned. After a closer look, he found that the other person's style of dressing was very different from before. In Li Yi's own words, he did not like to wear such showy clothes. His voice also seemed to be very different. Could it be that he had recognized the wrong person? Come to think of it, he had decisively rejected Mingzhu's invitation to come to the capital to become an official. 10 days ago, the two of them were still drinking and chatting merrily in the jadeite courtyard. Unless Li Yi set foot on the road to the capital as soon as he left Qing'an Prefecture, it would be impossible to see him here. But in this world, were there really 2 people who looked so similar? May I know this brother's name? I'm Li Yi. Li Yi cupped his hands in salute. An actor's self-cultivation, the basics of dramatic performance, an actor's learning manual. Li Yi, at this moment, felt like he was possessed by the best actor. If he worked hard, it was not impossible for him to win an Oscar. As for changing one's voice, the art of changing one's appearance and voice was an essential skill in the martial arts world. With just a little bit of skill, one could become a qualified voice actress. Li Xian no longer doubted his identity. After all, if it was really Li Yi, it was impossible for him not to recognize him. At this moment, he began to be interested in this person called Li Ming. Their appearances were more than 90% similar, and they were both surnamed Li. If it was said that the two of them didn't have any relationship, he wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. Could it be that this person called Li Ming was Li Yi's twin brother? Li Xian, who thought he had discovered a great secret, immediately forgot all his worries and asked curiously, "Do you know someone called Li Yi? He looks almost exactly like you. Are you from Qing'an Prefecture and know my elder brother?" The young man looked at him with surprise. "Haha, I know, of course I know." Li Xian laughed and said, "I really didn't think that Li Yi would actually have a younger brother that looks exactly like him. This is so fun." Li Yi sighed in his heart. With Li Xian's intelligence, to be able to live peacefully until he was 20 years old, he must have accumulated a lot of good karma in his previous life. He didn't plan to reveal his identity now. Before he realized it, he could still have 2 days of leisure. At this moment, a guard walked over and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince's consort is coming." Li Yi turned around and saw a group of people walking over. "Haha, I'm afraid I won't have the chance today. Li Ming, right? When I'm free, I'll find you for a drink." Li Xian laughed and strode forward. As long as he knew his name, investigating him was a very easy matter. The Crown Prince's consort? He saw a group of maids surrounding a woman with a curtain as she walked over. The woman's figure was not bad, but as for what she looked like, it was covered by a layer of white gauze, so he couldn't see it clearly. Li Xian hadn't been in the capital for long. It seemed that his marriage had only happened a few days ago. It was said that his crown prince's consort was the legitimate daughter of a wealthy family in the Jing kingdom. Her status was incomparably noble, and she was also an outstanding beauty. However, the two of them didn't stick together all day long during their honeymoon period. Li Xian, this fellow, was discussing the problem of worry with the old monk. Could it be that the couple's life was not harmonious? If that was the case, finding the old monk would be useless. He should go find an old Chinese doctor. "Husband, have you seen Grandmaster Sandalwood Yin?" Li Xian walked over with a smile on his face, and a light voice came from the veil. Li Xian nodded and said, "Great Master Tan Yin is well versed in Buddhism and is worthy of being an enlightened monk. I have benefited a lot from talking with the great master. Husband's complexion is very good. I presume that the great master has already dispelled husband's doubts. Ling Long, before you leave, double the amount of incense in the temple." The woman's voice was soft. A maid beside her immediately nodded in agreement. "Since you've finished offering incense and paying respects to the Buddha, let's return early." After saying this, Li Xian walked forward with large strides. The lips of the woman in the curtain moved, but in the end, she didn't say the words of appreciating the plum blossoms together. She let out a long sigh and said, "Let's go." The luxurious carriage slowly descended along the mountain path. Dozens of guards surrounded the carriage. Inside the carriage, the woman who had already taken off the curtains sat upright on the brocade couch. She looked out the window at the young man who would rather ride a horse than ride in the same carriage as her. Her eyes were slightly lowered, and her fair hands tightly gripped the hem of her dress. I wonder what expression Mingzu would have if she knew that Li Yi has a brother who looks exactly like him? Li Xian rode on the horse with a strange smile on his face. "Your Highness." A guard rode a horse and whispered as he caught up to him. "What is it?" Li Xian turned to look at him. "Just now at Cold Mountain Temple." The guard hesitated for a moment and said, "I think I saw Miss Rui." "Miss Rui?" Li Xian raised his brows. "Which Miss Rui?" Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he pulled on the reins of the horse and asked, "Are you talking about Mississippi Lu?" "Maybe I saw wrongly. Maybe they just look alike," the guard said after thinking for a moment. It was a coincidence if it happened once, but it was inevitable if it happened twice. An excited expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He pointed at a few people and said, "The few of you, follow me up the mountain. The rest of you, escort the crown princess back to the residence." A few clouds of dust disappeared from the mountain path. Inside the carriage, the woman revealed a disappointed expression. She put down the curtain and said, "Let's go." Li Yi was looking at the old monk in front of him with a vigilant expression. In just the blink of an eye, the old monk had appeared in front of him. It was enough to show that the old monk was an expert. At the very least, he couldn't beat him. "When I pointed at the plum tree just now, I meant to say that a moment of suffering is nothing and that there will be a day of happiness after suffering, just like what the benefactor said." The old monk looked at Li Yi with a smile and asked, "Young benefactor, how could you have such a misunderstanding?" Li Yi understood that the old monk might be unhappy with his interruption just now. This was not a joke on the internet in the future, but a real Zen master. When facing a real Zen master, he naturally couldn't just casually make up a joke to deal with it. Li Yi's expression turned serious and then he smiled mysteriously. He looked at the old monk and said, "The Buddha said, it can't be said, it can't be said." After saying that, he elegantly turned around and strode back in the direction from where he came. The old monk was stunned on the spot. After a long time, a smile appeared on his old face. He looked at the direction in which Li Yi left and said, "All appearances are fabricated. Worry is also empty. And worry is also empty. I was too obsessed with appearances. Young benefactor, you have great wisdom." Chapter 3:10. He pulled out a line in Buddhist language that he had heard from somewhere, and he didn't know if it was Buddhist language or not. In any case, that line, which he didn't understand but felt awesome, had frightened the old monk. Taking advantage of the fact that he hadn't recovered his wits, he hurriedly ran away. Who knew whether or not he would use the 1,000-leaf palm of great compassion and great compassion to strike him when he woke up? Cold Mountain Temple was not small, with innumerable halls and pavilions. The old madam seemed to be listening to some famous monk preach the scriptures. For a moment, he didn't know where Rui and the others had gone, so Li Yi decided to just stroll around the temple. The temple fair would last for 3 days. In these 3 days, there was an endless stream of visitors to Cold Mountain. There were believers who came to pray to Buddha and burn incense, as well as young men and women who came solely to admire the plum blossoms. The sharp-witted peddlers had long since grasped this opportunity and had long since found a spot at the top of the mountain, selling little trinkets like combs, wooden tablets, and so on. They claimed that these items were treasures that had been consecrated by the high monks of Cold Mountain Temple. 10 copper coins couldn't buy them, 10 copper coins couldn't buy them, and 10 copper coins naturally couldn't buy a comb either. Treasures personally consecrated by the high monks were not for sale for less than 1 copper coin. In addition, there was naturally no lack of people selling food. On a plaza far away from the plum blossom forest, a space had been cleared out. Peddlers carrying poles stood next to each other, loudly shouting steamed buns and noodles. They were not allowed to go to the plum blossom forest, saying that it would spoil the mood of those nobles. Any young master or young lady there was not someone they could afford to offend. A chubby boy dressed in embroidered clothes ran out of the plum blossom forest, huffing and puffing. He threw down a handful of silver, and in a short while, he ran into the forest with a large pile of food. Under a plum tree, a little girl of about 7 or 8 raised her head in anticipation. "Little Candy, eat." The chubby boy ran over, panting heavily, and placed all the things he had bought on the white cloth on the ground. "Thank you, big brother," the little girl said sweetly. She first picked up a piece of candied plum and gave it to the chubby boy. Then she sat down and began to eat. There were quite a few children of this age in the forest. They came out with their families, so it was impossible for them to quietly chant sutras and worship Buddha with the adults. In order to prevent them from making noise in the temple, most families would let their servants watch over them and let them play by themselves in the plum blossom forest. At this moment, there were a few servants standing behind the 2 children. Seeing the 2 young masters eating quietly, they began to chat. "Hey, Fatty Lee, you are here too." A few youths dressed in embroidered clothes quickly surrounded them as if they had discovered a new continent. The little fatty's expression changed at first, then he puffed out his chest and said, "Chen Xiaofan, I don't want to fight with you today. Why are you eating every time I see you? I think you might as well not call yourself Li Yingkai. Call yourself Pig Li instead." The few of them clearly had enmity with each other. The youth in embroidered clothes looked at the things on the white cloth and sneered. "Sure enough, it's Fat Pig Li. I'm afraid only pigs would eat these things." "Big brother." The little girl nervously grabbed onto the corner of the little fatty's clothes. "Pig Li, is this your sister? I thought everyone in your family was as fat as you." The youth in embroidered clothes laughed out loud. He suddenly ran over and fiercely stepped on the food on the white cloth. He pulled the little girl's face and pointed to the ground, saying, "This is the real pig's feed. How could a child bear such humiliation?" The little fatty only felt his blood rushing to his head, and he punched the chest of the youth in embroidered clothes. "You dare to make a move? Hit him." The youth in embroidered clothes seemed to be waiting for this moment. After avoiding the punch, he immediately shouted. Several youths behind him immediately swarmed up and pressed the little fatty to the ground. The little girl on the side was so scared that she cried out. The faces of several servants changed. Just as they were about to come over and pull them away, they were blocked by a few people who had been following behind the youth in embroidered clothes. There were many figures in the plum forest. Many people saw the scene here. Seeing that it was just a few children playing, they didn't take it to heart. "Hey, Fatty Lee, as long as you call me Grandpa, I'll let you go. How about it?" The youth in embroidered clothes squatted down and patted the little fatty's face. "Call you Grandpa." The little fatty had the advantage in size. He suddenly turned over and broke free from the few youths behind him. With a tiger pounce, he pressed the youth in embroidered clothes under his body. "Only when I'm full will I have the strength to beat you." With a loud shout, he clenched his fist and punched the youth in embroidered clothes. In the end, his fist didn't land on the face of the youth in embroidered robes. A young man grabbed his arm from behind and threw him to the side. He helped the pale-faced youth in embroidered robes up and said in a flattering manner, "Young master, are you all right?" Many people around frowned. A few children playing was nothing, but this young man attacking a child was a bit too much. "Catch him for me." Just now he was almost beaten by Li Yingkai. The youth in embroidered clothes had a pale face. He was so angry that he stomped his feet and said to the young man, "Stop." The few servants of the little fatty were firmly blocked and could not rush over. They could only shout anxiously. Looking at the man walking towards him, the little fatty rubbed his bruised wrist and stood up with the help of a tree. He stared at the man with an unyielding expression. Who are they? How can they be so domineering in the cold mountain temple? Someone around asked doubtfully. Lower your voice. That is the young master of Duke Chen's family. The little fatty is called Li Yingkai. He should be the younger generation of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Personnel. No wonder. These two families have been feuding for more than 10 years. However, it is a bit too shameless for a man to attack a child. That should be High Duke Chen's bodyguards. Little fatty only has a few servants who don't know martial arts. He's definitely going to suffer this time. However, it's just a joke between the younger generation. It won't be a big deal. Originally, there were a few people who disliked the man's behavior. After hearing that he was from Duke Chen's family, they immediately stopped talking. For most people, these words still carried a lot of weight. The little fatty gritted his teeth. When he saw the man's hand reach over, he was about to rush over. However, a hand reached out from behind him and grabbed the man's wrist. With a gentle shake, the man fell to the ground holding his arm and could not get up. At the same time, he felt someone pat him on the shoulder and a voice came from behind him. If you are being bullied, fight back yourself. The little fatty turned around and looked at the familiar figure. After a moment of shock, he shouted and rushed towards the youth in embroidered robes. The youth in embroidered robes wanted to run, but his reaction was a beat too slow. Soon, he was once again pounced on by the little fatty. The surrounding youths quickly rushed over to help, but they were unable to stop the little fatty's fist from landing on the youth in embroidered robes' face. The faces of the men blocking the little fatty's servants changed. Just as they were about to step forward, they saw the young man walking towards them. Let the children deal with their own matters. We should not interfere. Get out of my way, one of the men said impatiently. Just as he was about to walk past the young man, his body flew backwards in the next moment. So, there is no room for discussion? The young man looked at the men who were looking at him warily and the smile on his face disappeared. Chapter 3:11. Just now, Li Yi's view of this little fatty who was always thinking about eating changed. He knew that he was no match for him, but he was still unyielding. When fighting, he still remembered to protect the little girl behind him. It was hard to tell that this little fatty, who was a little hot-blooded, was actually the son of his third uncle, who was always indifferent no matter what happened. Even if the world was destroyed, it would have nothing to do with him. The grudges between children should be solved by them in their own way. It was fair no matter who won or lost. There was no need for these lackeys to intervene. You're courting death. Seeing that the young man kicked one of their people away, the remaining 4 guards were immediately furious. One of them went around to help the young man in embroidered clothes, while the other 3 surrounded Li Yi. The 2 people that were dealt with just now, one was a trick, and the other was a surprise attack. Among the remaining 3, one of them gave him a little pressure. Even if he could deal with them, he would not feel good. At the very least, he would have to take a few punches and kicks. Li Yi was not prepared to be beaten. He looked at the young man who was watching the show with his arms crossed and asked, "How long are you going to watch?" Bang! The man walking towards the little fatty was sent flying by Li Xian's bodyguard with a kick. Li Xian walked over with a playful look in his eyes. He looked at him and said, "I couldn't tell that Brother Li Ming actually had such skills." Li Yi looked puzzled. "You've seen my brother?" Li Xian's footsteps paused, and the expression on his face began to become suspicious. "Who are you people? How dare you interfere in my business?" Seeing that one of their own people was sent flying, and this guy who came out of nowhere treated them as nothing, one of the 3 people, who was obviously a bit tough and irritable, said angrily. Even though the capital was full of nobles, the Chen public house could be considered as a giant. Except for the imperial family and a few families that couldn't be provoked, it was basically an existence that could do whatever it wanted. Don't look at this big man's rough appearance. He was able to stay close to the young master and protect him. He had never heard that the Li family had any powerful backing, not to mention that the people in front of him were very unfamiliar. They were not the families that they couldn't afford to offend, so what was there to worry about? Your father. Li Yi looked at the man in surprise and gave him a thumbs up in his heart. Daring to call himself lousy in front of Prince Ning's crown prince. Was this guy trying to rebel and become Prince Ning himself? The royal family cared a lot about their dignity. Being disrespectful to the emperor was a serious crime that could result in beheading. This person dared to call the emperor brother, so he was a good man with courage. Jing Ku could be considered as a courageous man, but in the end, he was chopped into pieces by Emperor Qin Shi Huang. There were so many courageous men on Mount Liang, but in the end, all of them were wiped out. Since the ancient times, all the courageous men were now dead. From this, it could be seen that hot-blooded men usually did not have a good ending. Not long after the man said the word lousy, he was slapped in the face by one of Li Xian's guards, causing him to spit out all his teeth. By the time the other two reacted, their shoulders had already been pressed down, and they couldn't move at all. Break their legs. The leader of Li Xian's guards made the decision on his own. Don't you dare! We are from the house of High Duke Chen. Both of their legs were about to be broken. If they didn't raise the flag now, it would be too late. Usually, when they bullied others, most of them would just give them a beating. Even when they were dealing with those insignificant lords, they wouldn't break their legs. This was an act that completely shed all pretense of cordiality. When the leader of the guards heard this, he turned and looked at Li Xian. In the next moment he turned back and said to the guards, "Since they are from the house of High Duke Chen, just break one of their legs." In order not to disturb the atmosphere of people admiring the flowers, and to be a civilized person, the guards decided to drag them out of the peach forest and break their legs. At this time, the outcome of the fight with the little fatty had also been decided. It had to be said that when it came to fighting, the fatty had a natural advantage. The four youths had lived a luxurious life since they were young. They probably hadn't put in much effort to practice martial arts. They only used simple punches and kicks. If the strength was light, hitting the little fatty's body was like scratching an itch. However, if they were hit by the little fatty's fist, they could only squat on the ground and cry. There was no other outcome. In a short while, the four youths were all knocked to the ground. The little fatty crawled up from the ground and panted heavily. He patted the dust off his body, completely ignoring his bruised and swollen face. He looked down at the four defeated youths and said loudly, "Didn't you want to fight? Get up." If he pointed to the sky and shouted, "Who else?" He was afraid that he would be struck by lightning if he acted so pretentiously. Hearing this, the few youngsters in embroidered clothes crawled up from the ground and quickly ran out of sight. "This is..." Li Xian pointed at the little fatty who looked like the leader of the martial arts world. Li Yi shook his head and said, "We'll talk about this later." "Young master." Only then did the servants have time to run over. When they saw the little fatty's sorry state, they were about to cry. "I'm fine." The little fatty wiped his snot. Although his body was in great pain, his heart was sweeter than eating candied fruit. He ran to the little girl's side and held her hand, saying, "The delicious food is all dirty. Big brother will buy it for you later." A servant walked to Li Yi worriedly and said, "Young master, those are the sons of High Duke Chen's family. Young master beat them up. We're in big trouble." "High Duke Chen?" Li Yi looked at him and asked, "If it wasn't for today's incident, would they have caused less trouble for the Li family?" The servant was speechless for a moment. Young master's words seemed to make sense. The Chen and Li family had been at odds for more than 10 years. The Chen family had been intentionally or unintentionally suppressing the Li family for so many years. It could be said that the Chen family had a lot to do with the Li family's rapid decline. High Duke. There were only a few High Dukes in a country. The small Li family obviously couldn't afford to offend a first-class duke, but someone could. Li Yi turned to look at Li Xian and asked, "Can we afford to offend High Duke Chen?" Li Xian didn't seem to hear Li Yi's words. He looked at the little fatty, then looked at Li Yi and murmured, "Young master." "Young master. When did you have a son like this?" It seemed like he could afford to offend them. Li Yi felt that this world was quite unfair. They both had the surname Li, but why was there such a big difference? When the Li family was at its peak, there was still a big gap between them and the Chen family. The two families could have been on good terms, but in the end, the daughter of the High Duke was abandoned. It was no different from a slap in the face to the Chen family. Since then, the two families became enemies, and they went down the road of love and hate. Even if Li Xian didn't appear today, he would still stand up for the little fatty. First, as a member of the Li family, he couldn't watch him get bullied by others. Second, the reason why the Chan and Li families were in such a situation today was entirely because of his stubborn father. Li Yi felt very wronged. He didn't do many bad things in his previous life. He just didn't dare to help an old lady who fell, picked up some money on the street, and casually spent it. He didn't offend anyone. He transmigrated peacefully, but he somehow got involved in the fight of the pugilistic world and family disputes. Whatever he did, there would be people who opposed him. Even if he didn't do anything, there would be people who wanted to step on him. Wasn't it good to live a good life? If he had transmigrated into Dazhuang and Dazhuang's body, there wouldn't have been so many messy things, right? It was only the second day he came to the capital, and he already offended a high duke. Fortunately, he had that brother's godly assistance. With one sentence, he also dragged the royal family into the matter. Even if the servant's leg was broken, the Chen family probably wouldn't have the guts to find trouble with Li Xian. It was very likely that they would specially visit him to apologize. As for the Li family, it didn't matter if there were too many lice. After so many years of grudges, it didn't matter if there was another one. On the contrary, because of today's matter, if they wanted to find trouble with the Li family in the future, they might have to think twice. Li Yi felt that he was about to become a schemer. This damned society. In just half a year, a good young man of the 21st century had been forced into such a state. Feudalism was killing people. Just as Li Yi was sighing because of this, a group of people walked over from the entrance of the plum blossom forest in a grandiose manner. The ones walking in front were obviously the few youths with snot and tears running down their faces covered in bruises. Chapter 3:12. Behind the young men in embroidered clothes, the guards who were acting violently just now were now being carried by others. They were wailing incessantly, and one of their legs was bent at a strange angle. Li Xian's guards walked over from behind and stood quietly behind him. Their faces regained their calm expression, as if they were not the ones who broke someone's leg just now. At this time, the difference between professional guards and non-professionals was reflected. Li Yi once again realized the importance of bringing a few reliable bodyguards when he went out. People like Mississippi Liu who were always missing at critical moments would definitely starve to death in this line of work. Brother Li Qing, it's them. The leading young man in embroidered clothes pointed at Li Yi and the others, and said loudly to the young man beside him. After saying that, he gritted his teeth and looked at the little fatty opposite him, who had his head held high and chest out, as if his eyes were about to spit fire. It's just child's play. Don't you think you've gone too far by doing this? The young man walked forward and looked at Li Yi with a frown. As he spoke, he was also sizing up the people opposite him. In the capital city, he knew all the young men of similar age with a background. He even met a few of the emperor's princes a few times. These two people obviously did not belong to any of them. However, they dared to ignore High Duke Chen's residence. The dignity of a High Duke was only worth a leg in their eyes. If they did not really have a powerful background, then they were lunatics. However, before figuring out the identity of the other party, he would not go too far. He first tried to sound them out. Seeing that the other party was frowning and looking at him as if he wanted to seek justice for those people, Li Yi sighed in his heart. This was how the world was. The right was always in the hands of the few, the rich and the powerful. When he tried to reason with them, they insisted on using force. When they lost to Li Xian's guards in terms of force, they turned around and tried to reason with him. This was not the way to bully people, right? All the young masters and young mistresses present can testify that our young master clearly said just now that the children's affairs will be dealt with by themselves and did not intervene in the quarrel between the young masters. However, your family's guards actually bullied the young. I'm afraid that this is damaging to the dignity of High Duke Chen, isn't it? The servants of the Li family also felt that the young man was distorting the truth. Those people's legs were broken, but what did it have to do with their young master? It was obvious that they were blind and offended that young master, which caused the disaster. The Li family was not going to take the blame. Not bad. Indeed. The surrounding young masters and young ladies nodded in agreement. Although it was unreasonable for the young master to allow the little fatty to fight with a few children, he still knew his limits. On the other hand, Duke Chen's guard actually disregarded his status and attacked a child. It was a little too shameless. Moreover, in the beginning, it was the few kids from High Duke Chen's family who provoked them first. The little fatty was not weak at all. After what happened just now, he had already won a good impression in everyone's hearts. As for the bodyguards who had their legs broken, they had only themselves to blame. How could someone who could bring so many powerful bodyguards with him be an ordinary person? The house of High Duke Chen might be a colossus in the eyes of ordinary people, but what kind of place was the capital? There might not be many people who did not respect the house of High Duke Chen, but a few bodyguards who relied on their master's power would not be taken seriously. Feeling the gazes from the surrounding people, the young man felt a little embarrassed. He said, "Even if they are in the wrong, isn't it too cruel to break people's legs so easily?" Li Yi realized that this guy seemed to have set his sights on him. From the beginning to the end, he only broke one person's arm and sent another flying with a kick. The person who broke their legs was standing behind Li Xian. Every injustice had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. If he had the ability, he could go and find them. What was the logic of always coming after him? Moreover, what was so cruel about breaking a person's leg? That guy wanted to be Li Xian's father and be brothers with the emperor. It was already benevolent of His Highness that he was not beaten to death. Even if he went up and slapped Li Xian twice or kicked him twice, his crime would be much lighter than calling himself father in front of him. In the end, there were still people who were reasonable. A guard with a broken leg couldn't help but point at Li Xian's group and said, "Young Master Chang, our injuries were done by those people." Chen Liqing had the thought of personally breaking his other leg. Damn it, can't you just say it all at once? After talking for so long, you haven't even found the culprit. Are you kidding me? At this moment, he was also secretly cursing his bad luck. Why couldn't they just stay at home? Why do they have to bring a few friends to the cold mountain temple to enjoy the plum blossoms? What was even worse was that they had brought the little devil of their family. He was just an ordinary collateral family member of the Chen family. He had neither money nor status. The little devil in front of him with purple eye sockets was the treasure of the Chen family. If he didn't handle it well today, he wouldn't be able to explain himself when he went back. Why don't we go to the temple and find a place to sit? Li Xian turned his head to look at Li Yi and suggested. Li Yi agreed with his idea very much. It didn't feel good to stand here and be stared at like a monkey. The naughty kid's face was bruised, and he had to find a place to apply some medicine. Stop. Seeing that the two people seemed to be really planning to leave, Chen Liqing stepped forward and said loudly, "Don't you think you owe us an explanation? What do you want? Just say it." Li Xian pointed at a few guards. They understood and stepped forward to stand in front of the crowd. Li Xian looked at them and said impatiently, "Do you want to come one by one or all at once?" Arrogant, too arrogant. This was the most intuitive feeling of Chen Liqing and the men behind him. That person looks gentle, like someone who has been educated. How can he be so rude? Let's sit down and talk. If the other party also has a strong background, we just need to apologize and symbolically break a few legs. Both of us will have face, and the matter will be solved perfectly. Do we have to fight? All the guards who have martial arts on their side have their legs broken. How can a few scholars fight with those people? Aren't they courting death? Compared to Chen Liqing and the others, the surrounding people felt differently. Especially the eyes of the young women under the veil. They were all quietly glowing. The surrounding crowd naturally had to stand on the side of truth. High Duke Chen's servants used their power to bully others. Chen Liqing was just continuing to be vicious. As for the two young masters, they were obviously in the right. Of course, the most important thing was that the two of them were really handsome. Humph, we are scholars. How can we be like those boorish people in the mountains? Chen Liqing snorted coldly. A disdainful expression appeared on his face, covering the fear just now. He said, "Why don't we have a civil battle? If you win, we will let bygones be bygones. If we win, you need to personally apologize, and the person who attacked just now will have to break one of his legs. How about that?" Chen Liqing wasn't stupid enough to use his shortcomings to compete with others' strengths. They were all scholars, so they should use a more refined method. It was better to recite poems and write essays. As for fighting, it was simply a disgrace to scholars. After they left, they would investigate their background. If the two of them didn't have any background, they would definitely regret being born into this world. Civil battle? Hearing this, Li Xian thought for a while and decisively shook his head. Too troublesome. Let's have a martial battle. Why don't we only send out 2 people and all of you come together? Chapter 313. As the saying goes, when a scholar meets a soldier, he cannot be reasoned with. That was how Chen Liqing felt. The person in front of them was clearly a scholar, but he did not follow the rules of a scholar. He was determined to fight with force instead of words. The other party's bodyguard was obviously an expert that had been carefully selected. Even if there were only 2 of them, the few of them were definitely not a match for them. Only an idiot would agree to a physical fight. Li Xian frowned and looked like he was in a hurry. He said impatiently, "Fine, if you want a literary fight, then so be it. What are the rules?" Seeing that the person in front of him was finally being reasonable, Chen Liqing was overjoyed. He said, "It's simple. It's the season for plum blossoms and we're in the middle of a plum forest. Why don't we use plum blossoms as the theme and compose a poem? Let everyone here judge who is better. This is a literary fight." With that, he whispered to the person beside him, "Hurry and invite young Master Shen over. It's your turn." Li Xian crossed his arms and glanced at Li Yi. Once again, he looked like he was watching a good show. The ball went around in a circle and returned to Li Yi. There's no need for a literary fight. Li Yi was more inclined to Li Xian's suggestion. What couldn't be solved with 1 fist? If not, then 2 fists. Clean and efficient, without the slightest hesitation. If Mississippi Lu was here, she would have done this long ago. After spending so much time with her, it was inevitable that she would influence the way she did things. Haha, if you're afraid, you can just admit defeat. Chen Liqing smiled and said, "You only need to apologize in person and break the hands and feet of those who attacked you. Then we can forget about this. What do you think?" After seeing the other party's hesitation, Chen Liqing was even more certain that they were just 2 idiots. The last bit of worry in his heart disappeared. See, if they don't want to, then there's nothing to talk about. Li Xian said with a hint of schadenfreude. The scholars of Qing and Prefecture had already been harmed by him. The mere mention of the name Li Yi would make one's heart tremble. He was very happy to see the same thing happen in the capital. Only then would it be fair. Whispers of discussion could be heard from the surroundings. This Chen Liqing is also a genius with a little bit of fame, but he doesn't know right from wrong and acts shamelessly. Today has really opened my eyes. The people around him are all famous talents in the capital. In terms of poetry, how could those 2 young masters possibly compete with him? Look, he even invited young Master Shen here. Could it be that, although young Master Shen hasn't been in the capital for long, he made a name for himself during the Lantern Festival, using his poetry to win over most of the scholars? I heard that he intends to curry favor with the Chen family. Looks like Chen Liqing really doesn't care about his reputation anymore in order to win. Even though the surrounding scholars and young ladies were mostly standing on the side of Li Yi and Li Xian, they didn't think that they would be able to win. How could 2 nameless people compare to those outstanding scholars? What's more, there was a top talent like young Master Shen holding the fort. Does it hurt? Li Yi wiped the dust off the fatty's face and asked. No. Even though he grimaced in pain from being touched, he only breathed in and out, but he didn't admit it at all. He patted his chest and said, "This kid has some backbone." When the fatty showed off his prowess, Li Xian was also there. He walked over and patted his shoulder. Hearing the compliments, the fatty puffed out his chest even more. He held the young lady's hand like a victorious rooster. "Brother Shen, you're here." When a young man walked over, Chen Liqing smiled and went to greet him. The young man called Brother Shen cupped his hands and said, "I wonder why Brother Chen called me over?" "I do have something to trouble Brother Shen with." Chen Liqing smiled and said, "Let's go over and talk." "Haha, we're all friends. There's no need to be so formal." The young man looked at Chen Liqing in surprise and said with a smile, but he kept an eye on Chen Liqing. He knew that even though he called these people brothers on the surface, they were all from wealthy families in the capital. He was just an outsider. With the difference in status, they wouldn't treat him as a friend. Moreover, the scholars of the capital and Qing and had always looked down on each other. If it weren't for the fact that he had no background in the capital and needed their help, and the fact that they needed his poetry, they wouldn't be so friendly on the surface. As he brought him over, Chen Liqing briefly explained what had happened. He smiled, "We are scholars, so we're not like those boorish mountain people who rely on strength to win. It's a disgrace to our culture. But if it's a battle of words, we'll need Brother Shen's help. After all, in terms of poetry, Brother Shen is still better. This way, we'll be absolutely safe." "Brother Chen, you are being too modest. The Lantern Festival is just my luck. All of you here are famous scholars in the capital. How could I dare to show off in front of you all?" The young man cupped his hands and said. The two complimented each other, and the crowd automatically opened up a path for them. Chen Liqing walked to the front and looked at Li Yi. "For the sake of fairness, each side will send one scholar to fight, and one poem will decide the winner." He still wanted to save face in front of others. He couldn't let a group of famous scholars bully two nameless juniors. As long as Shen Zhao made a move, it would be enough to sweep them away. Chapter 3:14. "Good." Seeing Shen Zhao open his mouth, Chen Liqing was just about to praise, "Good poem." As soon as the word good left his mouth, he suddenly realized something was wrong. He stared at Shen Zhao and asked uncertainly, What did you just say?" Shen Zhao sighed and looked at Chen Liqing. "Brother Chen, believe me, if you choose to fight, your chances of winning will be higher." "Brother Shen, now is not the time to joke." Chen Liqing raised his head and narrowed his eyes. Shen Zhao's behavior was very abnormal. Although Chen Liqing did not think much of him because of his family background, he had to admit that he was very talented in poetry. It was not difficult for him to write a poem out of his mouth. Under normal circumstances, Shen Zhao, who wanted to curry favor with the Chen family, would not offend him over such a small matter. In reality, he had not shown any intention of refusing, until just now. Chen Liqing's gaze immediately turned to the young man opposite him. "What's going on? What's wrong with Shen Zhao?" Confusion appeared on the faces of the people behind Chen Liqing. For a moment, they could not understand what he had just said. As for the people around them, their minds were even more muddled. "Brother Li, long time no see." Shen Zhao raised his head and raised his hands in a salute to Li Yi. For some reason, after seeing this person who had changed the course of his fate again, his heart was calm and there was not a trace of hatred. In these days in the capital, he often thought back to the past. After losing the pride of the past, he suddenly found that the frivolity and arrogance of his youth, in the eyes of today, was just a joke. That young man had woken him up with a resounding slap, letting him know that there was always a higher mountain. He had completely shattered his pitiful arrogance, but it had also made him settle some things that he had never had before. "Brother Shen, long time no see." To be able to see an old friend from Qing and Prefecture here, Li Yi was slightly surprised and also raised his hands in a salute. Although the two of them had once clashed, there was no unforgettable hatred. To be able to see each other in the distant capital was not easy. Of course, the most important reason why Li Yi did not hate him was because he had taken advantage of him at that time. At this time, he faintly felt that the Shen Zhao in front of him was not the same as before. So they know each other. Everyone came to a sudden realization. No wonder Shen Zhao was unwilling to stand up for Chen Liqing. If that young master was an old acquaintance of his, then everything would make sense. Chen Liqing's face was a little embarrassed. He couldn't help but feel some resentment towards Shen Zhao. He sneered and said, "Shen Zhao, do you think that without you we can't compose a poem?" This time, she didn't even call him Brother Shen. Shen Zhao smiled and said, "I know that my talent in poetry is far from Brother Li's, so I won't embarrass myself. Brother Chen and the other brothers are all famous scholars in the capital, brimming with talent. Naturally, you don't need me." He naturally understood the meaning behind Chen Liqing's words. He was afraid that after today, they would no longer tolerate him. However, this was no longer important. These days, he had been trying to cling on to others, and there seemed to be something stuck in his heart. When he said those words just now, he suddenly felt a long-lost carefree feeling. No matter how conceited Chen Liqing was, he wasn't conceited enough to think that his poetry was better than Shen Zhao's. He only thought that Shen Zhao's words were modest. However, even if he couldn't beat Shen Zhao, couldn't he be compared to a nameless kid? Have you all thought it through? If you really can't compose a poem, then admit defeat. Chen Liqing sneered and no longer cared about Shen Zhao. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Why are you composing a poem? Go home and dream." Being forced to copy poems was something he had experienced many times. Li Yi had already lost interest in it. He waved his hand and said, "How old are you? What's the point of fighting all day? Can you not be so childish? Let's go." He patted the little fatty's head and turned to walk towards the exit. The little fatty hurriedly grabbed the little girl's hand and ran after him. "Big brother, wait for me." The one selling buns in front, "Wait a moment too." Chen Liqing stared blankly at their backs as they left. His face turned green and then white. There was a mouthful of hot blood in his chest. They left just like that. What was going on? Even if they wanted to leave, they had to apologize and break the legs of those servants before they could leave. "All of you, stop right there," Chen Liqing shouted loudly. Just as he was about to chase after them, the young man who left turned around and revealed 2 rows of white teeth. He smiled and said, "If you follow me again, I'll break your legs too." After saying that, Li Xian laughed loudly. He was in a good mood and quickened his pace to chase after them. The group of people who were left looked at each other in dismay. The surrounding people who wanted to watch the show were clearly disappointed. They thought that there would be an exciting battle of words and 2 excellent poems. They didn't expect that one side would retreat without a fight. But thinking about it, they knew that they were no match for Chen Liqing and the other scholars. If they really went to compose a poem, they would be asking for humiliation. They might as well retreat shamelessly. Preposterous! Chen Liqing's face no longer had the slightest trace of elegance. His eyes were about to spit fire. "Investigate. When we go down, we must investigate the background of those 2 fellows." He had suffered such humiliation. If he didn't avenge himself, he was afraid that his heart would never be at peace. "Brother Liqing, why are you so angry? Left and right are just 2 cowardly rats. They don't even have the courage to fight a battle of words. I'm afraid that they don't have a bit of knowledge and can't even compose a decent poem. Left and right are 2 idiots. After today, there will be no place for them in the circle of scholars in the capital." "Absolutely, absolutely." Brother Lu's words make sense. A person beside Chen Liqing comforted him, and the rest of the people revealed looks of disdain on their faces at the right time as they echoed one after another. As for the surrounding people, even though they felt that it was unfair for Chen Liqing to propose a battle of words, the 2 young masters didn't even have the courage to accept the challenge. Even though they were smart, they didn't have the backbone of a scholar. Haha, they don't have a bit of knowledge, idiots. At this moment, an undisguised laughter rang out from the crowd. The laughter was piercing to the ears. Everyone turned their heads to look. It's Shan Zhao. After discovering the source of the laughter, everyone was stunned. "What are you laughing at?" Chen Liqing glared fiercely at him and asked. Shen Zhao held his stomach and laughed until he was out of breath. He pointed at Chen Liqing and said, "Brother Chen, on your waist. On your waist, can I take a look at the fan on your waist?" Seeing Shen Zhao's expression, Chen Liqing was shocked. Why would he want a fan at this time? Was this Shen Zhao crazy? It was said that once this person became crazy, he could do anything. If one didn't do as he said, who knew what he would do? A trace of fear appeared on Chen Liqing's face. He quickly handed over the fan on his waist. Whoosh! Shen Zhao waved his hand and opened the fan. He smiled and said, "You wrote this Shuidiao Getu on the fan. I believe that Brother Chen likes it a lot?" Chen Liqing took a step back. He thought to himself that he liked this Shuidiao Getu. What did it have to do with Shen Zhao? Shen Zhao stopped laughing. He looked strangely at the scholar who had just called him an idiot. He said, "When Brother Lu writes a poem that surpasses this Shuidiao Getu, then you can go say that others are an idiot." He returned the fan to Chen Liqing and laughed. "Brother Chen, you don't need to investigate him anymore. That idiot brother is Qinggong Prefecture, Li Yi." Seeing the expressions of Chen Liqing and the other scholars change, Shen Zhao felt extremely carefree. He laughed a few times and turned to leave without looking back. Qinggong Prefecture, Li Yi. Even though they didn't know what he looked like, this name was not unfamiliar to the scholars and beauties of the capital. Her pretty face was full of shock. Her cherry lips parted slightly and she took out the round fan from her bosom. There was the immortal magpie bridge that she had personally embroidered. In this world, the best way to become famous was to write an excellent poem. No matter where the poem first appeared, it would eventually be known by all the scholars of the Jing kingdom and be passed down for generations to come. How can this be? How can this be? Chen Liqing's mind was blank as he mumbled to himself. The scholar surnamed Lu's face was red. He wanted to find a hole in the ground to hide in. The surrounding crowd was shocked. A few poems involuntarily appeared in their minds. Under the curtain, the rich young mistress's pretty face was slightly red. Her gaze occasionally looked in the direction of the exit of the plum blossom forest. At this moment, no one would think that the person who left was retreating without a fight. That was disdain. He was right. Chen Liqing was stupid and childish to compete with the scholars who wrote Shui Diao Getu and Immortal Magpie Bridge. Shen Zhao was not being modest just now. From the beginning to the end, he had treated this matter as a joke. So what if it was Chen Liqing? So what if it was the gifted scholar of the Jing kingdom? Could they make all the women in the world whisper in their boudoirs? If the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, why would they stay together day and night? And embroider their poems on handkerchiefs? They couldn't. Thinking of this, everyone looked at Chen Liqing with a strange expression. Chapter 3:15. In a room in the back of the cold mountain temple. Ouch, be gentler, it hurts, it hurts. A servant of the Li family smeared the medicinal wine that the monks had brought onto the bruises on the chubby boy's face. The chubby boy, who had been hot-blooded and would rather be beaten than lower his head, continuously sucked in a breath of cold air and cried out in pain. It wasn't until a little girl stuffed a bun into his mouth that the room finally quieted down. Why have you come to the capital? Do you really have a younger brother here? Li Xian looked at Li Yi with a mind full of confusion, waiting for his explanation. Not only did he have a younger brother, but he also had 7 aunts and 8 aunts, even Wang Erniu from next door. To explain this matter to Li Xian, he first had to talk about the grudges of the previous generation. None of this is important. What's important is that I'm already in the capital, Li Yi said with a wave of his hand. He really didn't want to talk about those messy things again. He took a sip of tea and glanced at Li Xian. But you, didn't you come to the capital to finish your marriage? Why haven't you gone back yet? You're actually in the mood to discuss Zen with an old monk. This isn't like you. Could it be that after you got married, you've lost yourself in pleasure and even your personality has changed? If Li Yi remembered correctly, other than some special circumstances, a prince was not allowed to stay in the capital for long periods of time without the permission of the emperor. When he left Qing and Fu, Ning Wang had already returned, but Li Xian was still here. It looked like he had no intention of leaving. Li Xian said gloomily, Uncle Huang said that sooner or later, I will have to manage father's fief. He wants me to stay in the capital and learn these things from the officials of the court. I'm afraid I won't be able to leave the capital in the short term. Li Yi thought to himself that the emperor really was a busybody. He even had to worry about these things. Given the condition of his body, if he wanted to live to the end of his life, it would probably be up to luck. Thinking about it this way, it wasn't surprising to see him discussing Zen with the old monk here. With his temperament, he was absolutely suitable to be an idle prince, and he was even more suitable to be a scientist. Even if he was asked to govern a prefecture, a state, or even a county, it might be a good thing for the people, but he himself would definitely recite, My white hair is 3,000 feet long, and my fate is like a long sorrow, and die of depression. Li Xian didn't continue to ask why Li Yi was in the capital. If he wanted to know, it wouldn't take much effort. However, as he said, none of this was important anymore. The important thing was that with him here, the future would not be so boring. Suddenly, Li Yi thought of something important. He turned around, looked at Li Xian and said seriously, By the way, don't tell Mingzu that I'm coming to the capital. Why? Li Xian looked at him with confusion. Mingzu was also very bored in the palace. In reality, he had planned to enter the palace today. If she knew that Li Yi had come to the capital, she would probably be very happy. The reason was, of course, if Her Highness knew that he was coming to the capital, she would certainly think of a way to make him stay. There was no doubt about this. Li Yi only treated this trip as a vacation. He didn't think he would stay here for the rest of his life. He had only left home for a few days, but he already missed Rui and Xiaofan. Even when he saw a strong man on the street, Fang's face would involuntarily appear. This was an illness. He could only recover when he returned home. He sighed and said, "To be honest, I'm only staying in the capital for a few days. In a few days, I'll be returning to Qing and Fu." Although it was not very good not to greet her when he came to the capital, after thinking for a long time, Li Yi felt that it was better for the two of them not to meet. The feeling of his life and death being controlled by others was something that Li Yi, who had a soul from the 21st century, was not something that he was used to. Unfortunately, in a feudal dynasty like the Jing kingdom, the royal family had this kind of power. If there was no need, he didn't want to have anything to do with the royal family. Li Xian was already an exception. If he got involved with the princess further, Li Yi was worried that the days where he could lie in the courtyard and bask in the sun would be gone forever. Of course, if she was still the cool and disrespectful Constable Mingzhu, he would be very happy to accept it. So soon? Li Xian couldn't help but show disappointment on his face. He didn't have the excitement from before. After applying the medicine, the little fatty became excited again. It was the first time he showed off his power in front of his enemy. Even though he was slightly injured, he couldn't hide the excitement in his heart. He held the food in his hand and walked around the room. Suddenly, the little fatty looked at the surrounding walls of the room. His eyes rolled a few times, and he ran in front of Li Yi. He pointed at the strange marks on the wall and asked, "Big brother, what's written on the wall?" Although Li Yi didn't grow up in the capital, he was the number one among the younger generation in the Li family. It was normal for the little fatty to call him Big Brother. After what happened just now, the little fatty was full of good feelings towards this big brother that he had only met twice. Of course, he was more looking forward to having him teach him a few moves. When he fought with Chen Xiaotian, he would be able to send them flying with a kick. Just thinking about it made his blood boil. Hee, Big brother doesn't study hard and can't read. The little girl skipped over and said with a smile. The little girl was also a member of the Li family. She was the daughter of a concubine of the Li family's third uncle. She was Li Yingcai's half-sister. Perhaps it was because she was too young, she was a little shy. She hid behind the little fatty and blinked her eyes curiously at Li Yi. Hearing this, the little fatty's face turned red. Although he didn't study hard, he could still recognize a few words. However, the words written on the wall were crooked and didn't look like they were written in a book. How could he recognize them? That's Sanskrit. It's normal that you don't recognize it. Li Yi said with a smile. You know Sanskrit? Li Xian looked at him in surprise. It was normal for the little fatty not to know Sanskrit. Li Yi grew up in Qing Prefecture. Under normal circumstances, he shouldn't be able to recognize it either. Once again, Li Yi confirmed that this guy must have dozed off in class when he was young. This was a temple. Buddhism originated from ancient India. Although the wheel of history had gone astray, it shouldn't be much different in this world. The earliest scriptures must have been written in Sanskrit. After being translated, it became what it was today. Li Yi had studied history carefully. In the early years of the previous dynasty, there was indeed a monk called Xuanzang who went west to India and brought back countless scriptures. However, it was different from the other world. After Xuanzang returned to his country, the Tang Empire was torn apart before he could translate the scriptures. Xuanzang also died of a serious illness. An eminent monk of that generation had fallen. Until now, those scriptures had not been completely translated. This was a temple. Other than Sanskrit, what else could those strange words written on the wall be? I know a thing or two. Li Yi said modestly without blushing. Of course, he didn't know Sanskrit. Although there were Buddhist classics and even Sanskrit dictionaries in the library, he always felt that it was useless to learn it. Moreover, one couldn't learn a language just by knowing a few words. There was no need to spend so much effort. What's written on the wall? Li Xian looked at him and asked in disbelief. Not only could he write poems and lyrics, he knew a lot of things that he didn't know. But he even knew such an obscure language like Sanskrit. The gap between them was so big that it hurt his heart 10,000 times more. When Bodhisattva Amitabha was deep in the Prajnaparamita, he saw that the 5 skandhas were empty, and he passed through all suffering. Form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Perception, thought, action and knowledge are the same. Li Yi said casually. This is the Buddhist scripture, Mahaprajnaparamita Sutra. It talks about the path of Bodhisattva. Seeing that his big brother even knew these crooked things, the little fatty's eyes were already shining. Finally, Li Xian's face showed extreme surprise. Although he didn't know Sanskrit, Li Yi's words sounded very professional. Prajnaparamita, Sarira, form and emptiness sounded very professional. Coupled with his trust in him, he didn't doubt that what he said was a lie. Young benefactor is indeed knowledgeable. In the previous dynasty, Master Xuanzang translated the Prajnaparamita Sutra, but he only completed half of it before he reached nirvana. The other half of the sutra is still in our Cold Mountain Temple's sutra depository. I wonder where did young benefactor learn it? An old monk walked in from outside and asked with a smile. Master Tan Yin, could the Sanskrit on the wall really be that sutra? Li Xian walked over and asked the old monk skeptically. The old monk stroked his beard and smiled, shaking his head. That's the Diamond Sutra. Chapter 316. Li Yi was embarrassed. Thinking that Li Xian didn't know Sanskrit, he casually recited the Heart Sutra that Li Xian was most familiar with to fool him. The Heart Sutra was probably one of the most widely circulated scriptures in Buddhism in the future. Especially the line's form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. They often appeared in TV dramas. Even if you weren't a Buddhist, you could say it casually. It was awkward after saying it out loud. Being exposed by the old monk and Li Xian's playful eyes, he was put on the spot for a moment. So I heard, at one time, the Buddha gave a lonely garden in the country of Shitra, together with 1,250 monks. Li Yi laughed dryly and said, so it's the Diamond Sutra. I'm sorry, I saw it wrong. Li Xian's face was full of disbelief. The two scriptures were so different, how could he have seen it wrong? Would a normal person think of the immortal Magpie Bridge as Shui Diao Getu? If he was literate, he wouldn't have made such a mistake. So I heard, at one time, the Buddha gave a lonely garden in the country of Shitra. The old monk raised his eyebrows and looked at Li Yi with a serious expression. Could it be the Diamond Sutra translated and annotated by the later Qin monk, Kumarajiva? Legend has it that this translation was recognized by the monks at that time and was widely spread. However, it was lost with the fall of the later Qin dynasty. Where did you learn it? Obviously, what Li Yi just said was not what was written on the wall. The atmosphere in the room became awkward again. Li Yi decided not to speak anymore. This old monk must be taking revenge on him for tricking him earlier. It was said that a monk's 6 senses were pure, without anger, but it was all a lie. He had never seen a monk who held a grudge like this before. Inkai, let's go home. Li Yi turned and said to the little fatty, then strode out of the room. Young benefactor, please wait. The old monk stepped forward and blocked his way. With Li Yi's level, he didn't see how the monk came over. He just felt his vision blur and a shiny bald head appeared in front of him. Li Yi was shocked, thinking that this old monk was not a Shaolin disciple. Could he be a spy of the Xiaoyao sect? This wave-like subtle steps had already reached the acme of perfection. Expert. Li Yi was absolutely certain that this old monk was an expert. However, he wasn't worried, because under the guidance of a servant of the Li family, Mississippi Lu was already walking over. Is there anything else, Grandmaster? It was better to be polite in someone else's territory. Even if Mississippi Lu defeated the old monk, Rui wouldn't be able to deal with the 18 Arhats formation, Vajra demon subduing formation, and so on. A kind smile appeared on the old monk's face again as he asked, I just want to know where you learned the Prajna Heart Sutra and Diamond Sutra that you mentioned just now. Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. He finally understood why the old monk would do such a thing. Although the overall history of this world hadn't changed much, there were still many historical differences from the original world. The eminent monk of the previous dynasty, Master Xuanzang, traveled thousands of miles from India to retrieve the Mahayana Buddhism, but he died before he could translate it into Chinese. Many Buddhist scriptures could only exist in the form of Sanskrit. With the rapid destruction of India, there were fewer and fewer people who knew Sanskrit. Eminent monks who were proficient in Sanskrit were even rarer. For decades, there hadn't been a mighty person who could translate these scriptures, which greatly hindered the spread of the teachings. The old monk's dharma must have reached a certain level. He could tell the difference just by listening to a few lines of the scriptures. He might have thought that the scriptures had already been translated by an eminent monk. What's wrong? Lu Rui walked over. After glancing at the old monk, he stood beside Li Yi and tilted his head to ask. The old monk still had a kind smile on his face, but his gaze lingered on Lu Rui for a moment longer. I'm fine. Li Yi gave her a reassuring look. Since the old monk didn't have any ill intentions and didn't intend to use the 18 bronze men formation and the diamond demon subduing formation, there was no need to be cautious. He looked at the old monk and smiled. It's a long story. It was a winter more than 10 years ago. I only remember that it was very cold that winter. The north wind was biting cold, and snow was flying everywhere. One morning, I opened the door to find an old monk in thin clothes lying in front of my house. Perhaps it was because of the climate change, but more than 10 years ago, the winter in Qing'an Prefecture was much colder than it was now. Every year, there would be a heavy snowfall. The north wind was biting cold, and the snow would seal the mountains. Coincidentally, a famous doctor would fall in front of Li Yi's house this year. Next year, a Buddhist monk would fall, and the year after that, an old Taoist would fall. In short, under the rule of Emperor Li Xian's relatives, the elderly in the Jing kingdom didn't have an easy time, especially during the difficult winter. Fortunately, the people of this era didn't lack warm-hearted people. Every time they found an elderly person lying in front of their house, they would kindly help them back. A bowl of hot soup and a quilt could save an elderly person who had one foot in the grave. Because he had the best audience in the world, with Li Yi's ability to tell stories, if he told stories in the brothel, the storytellers could only go hungry. Li Xian listened with great interest. He was very envious of Li Yi's luck of randomly picking up an eminent monk in front of his house. The gate of the prince's mansion was even more majestic and imposing. Why had no one ever fallen? It must be because those servants were too fierce. When he returned this time, he had to properly reorganize the servants in the mansion. So this scripture of yours is what you read from the eminent monk left behind before he left. Li Xian suddenly understood and asked. The scripture written by the eminent monk is of extraordinary value. Where is that scripture now? Li Yi touched his nose and said, once when I was reading in the toilet, I found that the toilet token was gone. I saw that the paper of the scripture was soft, so Li Xian's eyes widened, his face full of disbelief. Looking at Master Tan Yin's appearance, that scripture must be extraordinary. It was very likely that it was written by an eminent monk of the present age. It was incomparably precious and its value was immeasurable. Someone actually used such a treasure to wipe. The smile on the old monk's face had already stiffened. His beard could not help but tremble, a hint of redness appeared on his face, and his breathing also began to quicken. As if feeling danger, Li Yi raised his eyebrows and moved a little closer to Li Yi's side. Amit Ba. After a moment, the old monk's breathing gradually calmed down. He chanted a Buddhist name and then asked, I wonder if the young benefactor remembers the contents of that scripture? Of course, I used that scripture to learn to read. I have long memorized all the scriptures in it. Li Yi used his own experience to verify that the saying that monks were tranquil and emotionless was a lie. This old monk was obviously a person of the eminent monk level. Just now, even his eyes were red. If he said that he did not remember the scripture in the scripture again, 18 monks with sticks all over their bodies would jump out at the next moment. That scripture is very important to my Buddhist sect. This old monk has a presumptuous request. Young benefactor, could you make a copy of those scriptures? In the future, my Buddhist sect will definitely repay you generously. It is also a virtuous deed and will be blessed by Buddha. All the wrinkles on the old monk's face were revealed, and his turbid eyes were full of smiles. He looked even more like an enlightened eminent monk. It's nothing. Master, you are exaggerating. Li Yi smiled. Equally extraordinary. With just a few words, the tense atmosphere from before finally disappeared and became incomparably harmonious. Copying scriptures was not something that could be completed in a short time. It would take a few days. Of course, Li Yi would not stay in Cold Mountain Temple forever. He made an appointment with the old monk 7 days later. Cold Mountain Temple would send someone down the mountain to retrieve the scripture that Li Yi had copied. A servant from the Li family came to report that old mistress and the others had already left the mountain. The old monk personally sent them out of the temple, which immediately attracted countless people's amazement. They were wondering who those people were and why Master Sandalwood would personally send them off. After all, the last time His Royal Highness Prince of Wei came, he did not receive such treatment. Along the way, Mississippi Lu's expression was not quite right. When she was about to get on the carriage, she looked back at the old monk. "Master, do you know the 1,000-leaf palm of great compassion?" The old monk was stunned, then shook his head. "What about Arhut fist?" The old monk shook his head again. "Vajra palm? Ijin Jing? He doesn't even know the 72 ultimate skills. What kind of master is he?" Mississippi Lu curled her lips and mumbled before getting into the carriage. Chapter 317. It's the Cold Mountain Temple. A small temple. It's normal that they don't know the 72 ultimate arts. You can't expect any monk to be as powerful as the Dharma Hall of the Shaolin Temple. If there's a chance next time, I'll bring you to the Shaolin Temple. Inside the carriage, Li Yi was comforting Mississippi Lu, who didn't know the 72 ultimate arts of Shaolin. Looking at her disappointed expression, Li Yi suspected that accompanying the old madam was just an excuse, and that she wanted to see the legendary Shaolin Kung Fu. One had to know that in the Wuxia stories he had told her, every monk was an expert who looked down on the martial arts world. Fortunately, the old monk really didn't know those Kung Fu. Otherwise, if the two of them were to fight, the Cold Mountain Temple would be torn down. Li Yi looked at her and advised, "Don't ask the master such questions in the future. A monk should keep a low profile. Even if he really knew these Kung Fu, he wouldn't say it out loud." Looking at Mississippi Lu nodding as if she understood his words, Li Yi felt relieved. It seemed that he had misunderstood her. Although Rui had a bad temper, she was not as stubborn as he thought. "Well, since he doesn't want to admit it, I'll just test him next time," Mississippi Lu said as she looked out of the window. Li Yi decided to take back his thoughts. Suddenly, he seemed to realize something. He turned to look at her and asked, "You don't know?" "I really don't know the 1,000-leaf palm of mercy. And the Vajra palm, I've never heard of it. There are countless scriptures in the library. Which one is the muscle bone strengthening scripture?" In the Cold Mountain Temple, the old monk looked at his disciples who had bruises all over their faces and asked, "What happened? Why are you all in such a sorry state? Was there a fight in the temple?" A young monk hugged his arms and shed 2 lines of aggrieved tears. He choked and said, "There was a female benefactor just now." Li Yi sighed and said, "Rui, it's better if you don't go to the Cold Mountain Temple anymore. Their 18 bronze men formation and Vajra demon subduing formation are very powerful. Even a grandmaster wouldn't be able to escape easily once they're trapped. Especially the 18 bronze men, they hold iron rods in their hands and their bodies emit golden light." Mississippi Lu's eyes were full of fighting spirit. "Is that so? I'd like to see if it's really as powerful as you say it is." The carriage drove into the city gate. Mississippi Lu didn't plan to take the carriage back to the Li family. She planned to walk back slowly and experience the local customs in the capital. Li Yi did not intend to accompany her, but for the safety of the people in the capital, he got off the carriage. He dismissed the servants who wanted to stay and let them go back with the little fatty. A beautiful young lady walked in front. When she passed by a stall or a shop, she would go in and take a look. 2 handsome young masters followed behind her. A little further away, a few guards lagged far behind. They were not as nervous as they used to be. With Mississippi Lu around, nothing would happen to His Royal Highness. If even she couldn't do it, it would be useless for them to go up. Mississippi Lu had just bought a piece of fashionable cloth. When she saw another shop with more luxurious decorations, she immediately handed the cloth to Li Yi and walked in. Li Xian's bodyguard tactfully walked over and took on the role of a porter. "Do you know, I found a kind of sturdy and light cloth in the capital. It's perfect for making kites. The capital is really not something Qing and prefecture can compare to. There are many good things here. I searched everywhere in Qing and prefecture, but I couldn't find a suitable cloth." As Li Xian walked, he said, "I've tried it before. The kites made from this kind of cloth can stay in the air for a longer period of time. Yesterday, a guard ran down a steep slope and actually flew more than 10 zhong in the air. However, he didn't fly too high. The highest he flew was about 2 zhong above the ground." Li Xian wasn't satisfied with growing wings on his mind. He wanted to plant wings on the guards of the prince's mansion. Fortunately, the guards of the prince's mansion were all experts. Even if they fell from a height of 3 to 2 feet, they would be fine. Otherwise, Prince Ning Mansion would definitely become the largest sanatorium for the disabled in the Jing Kingdom. According to his current knowledge, to be able to do this was already not bad. At the very least, he was in the right direction. He wasn't like that fellow who tied a rocket launcher to a chair and pulled 2 kites in his hands and wanted to fly into the sky. Also, I'm also making the hot air balloon that you mentioned last time. But there's a big problem. The cloth isn't fireproof and it's very likely to burn. There's also no suitable fuel. Even if I fly, I won't be able to last long. Under the inspiration of Li Xian's thinking had already far surpassed the people of this era. After such a long time, he finally understood that there was only one person in this world who could discuss these things with him. Geniuses were all lonely. Ordinary people couldn't understand the pain of not being able to find a confidant in the entire world. These words had been bottled up in his mind for a long time. Finally, he found someone who was worth talking to and who could understand him. From the beginning, his mouth hadn't closed. The direction is right. The material and fuel for the hot air balloon is indeed the biggest problem. There's something called tung oil. It's very light and heat-resistant. I can try to apply it on the cloth. As for the fuel, there's also something called fierce kerosene. Maybe I can give it a try. Li Yi had discovered a long time ago that Mississippi Lu had no immunity to good-looking cloth. She obviously didn't know how to sew clothes, but every time she went out on the street, she would buy some cloth. Last time, 2 pieces of cloth were bitten by rats. In a fit of anger, she chased the rats out of their holes and tore them into pieces. Accompanying a woman shopping was a very tiring thing. Mississippi Lu entered the cloth shop and couldn't come out for a while. Li Yi casually sat down at a noodle stall next to the cloth shop and continued to complete his plan to cultivate a great scientist. Guest, would you like to eat noodles? A shy voice came from the opposite side. Li Yi raised his head and saw a skinny girl around 10 years old looking at them. The next moment, the little girl was pulled to the back by a woman with a white scarf wrapped around her head. The woman said with a smile, "Children don't know anything. Please rest as much as you want." The 2 young masters in front of them had extraordinary temperaments. The one on the left could probably buy the whole noodle stall with just 1 piece of clothing. How could such nobles eat noodles here? Li Yi saw the little girl hiding behind the woman and looking at them with a wronged expression. He smiled and said, "A bowl of noodles. Put more chopped green onions. No coriander." Having lived 2 lives, he didn't have the habit of not eating on the street. A few months ago, he and Xiaofan ate a bowl of vegetarian noodles on the street of Qing and Prefecture. It was better than any delicacy. Today, he had eaten something in the morning. He was already hungry. Just thinking of the steaming hot sour noodle soup made his appetite increase. The woman was stunned for a moment, then immediately nodded and said, "Yes, please wait a moment. The noodles will be served soon." The skinny little girl washed a rough porcelain bowl 5 or 6 times before putting it on the table. The woman cooked a bowl of noodles. The noodles were 30% more than usual. She seasoned it, sprinkled a handful of chopped green onions, and immediately brought it over. "Guest, the noodles are ready." It was just a bowl of wheat flour in front of him. There wasn't even a single green vegetable, but it smelled extraordinarily fragrant. Li Yi looked at the woman in surprise. The sauce she had just put in was definitely not ordinary. Li Xian smelled the fragrance and couldn't help swallowing a mouthful of saliva. He hesitated for a moment, then raised his head and said, "Give me a bowl too." A guard came forward and was about to say something when Li Xian waved his hand. He had no choice but to leave. A moment later, at the noodle stall on the side of the street, 2 noblemen with extraordinary temperaments were eating noodles, which became a different kind of scenery on the street. Lu Rui walked out of the cloth shop with a roll of cloth in his arms and saw such a scene. Chapter 3:18. Lu Rui had used half a year to prove one thing. Anything that Li Yi liked to eat would definitely taste good. Therefore, after a while, there was another beautiful young lady sitting at the noodle stall eating noodles on the side of the street, in addition to the 2 noble young masters with extraordinary bearing. The lady stood in the stall, rubbing her hands nervously. The stall had always served uncouth people. Even if they were slightly noble, they wouldn't eat noodles here. She couldn't handle the scene in front of her. The skinny little girl had a faint smile on her face, revealing 2 cute canine teeth. If she wasn't too skinny and didn't have much flesh on her face, she would also be a beautiful little girl. "Madam, give me another bowl." Li Yi put down the bowl. He had even finished the soup, but he still felt like he hadn't had enough. Even he himself was curious why he had such a special liking for the noodles of this noodle stall. He felt a sense of familiarity, as if he had eaten it a long time ago, and more than once. Ah! It was rare for a distinguished guest to like to eat her family's noodles. The lady responded, and the smile on her face grew wider. She hurried to prepare the noodles. Li Xian cast a disdainful look at Li Yi's behavior. He had received the etiquette of the royal family since he was young. He only ate until he was 70% full. No matter how much he liked the food, he wouldn't eat a second bowl. He wiped his mouth, pushed the empty bowl to the side and said, "Madam, cook another bowl. I want more noodles." Just now, he clearly saw that the noodles in Li Yi's bowl were at least 20% more than his. How could a dignified heir lose to him in this kind of thing? When he ate the second bowl of noodles, Li Yi slowed down. After all, although the bowl was a little small, the amount was not little. He looked up at the lady and asked, "The sauce that Madam just put in should be a secret recipe passed down in your family, right?" Li Yi had eaten a lot of noodles in his 2 lives, so he was quite knowledgeable about it. The noodles could only be considered average, but the soup was really delicious. It was not inferior to the famous old restaurants in his previous life. In the past, those elegant young masters would never look her in the eye when they passed by. The woman had never met such a kind noble before. She smiled and nodded, saying, "Noble's guess is correct. This sauce has been passed down from our ancestors for several decades. Looks like it's an old shop." Li Yi smiled and said, "The taste of this noodles is inexplicably familiar. I feel like I've eaten it somewhere before." "You're not from the capital, are you?" the woman asked. Li Yi shook his head and said, "Don't call me nobleman anymore. I'm really not from Beijing." Then, young master must have remembered wrongly. Our ancestors were all in the capital, and this secret recipe has never been shown to anyone. It's impossible for young master to have eaten it anywhere else. The nervousness in the woman's heart had almost disappeared. When talking about the secret recipe, she couldn't help but say a few more words. Li Yi didn't continue the question. Perhaps he really had eaten similar noodles before, but it was in another world. After all, there was already a bowl of noodles at the bottom. This time, he only ate half of the noodles and finished the soup. Li Xian rubbed his bulging stomach and imitated the woman to drink the soup. If this scene was seen by the imperial censor, he would at least reprimand him for losing his royal bearing. The woman began to clean the bowls and chopsticks while the little girl wiped the tables and chairs with a cloth. The weather was still cold after the Lantern Festival, but her forehead was covered in a fine layer of sweat. Bang! A muffled sound suddenly came from the side. A large foot immediately appeared on the table that the little girl had just wiped. What followed was a strong smell of foot odor. "Lady He, it's time to pay the membership fee." Li Yi covered his nose and looked at the rough man as if he was looking at a gas bomb. Mississippi Lu had the fastest reaction. She had already pinched her nose and moved far away. The big man's foot was placed on the table next to Li Xian, less than a foot away. Li Yi clearly saw his face turn from red to white and then green. Then, he suddenly turned his head and covered his mouth to retch. Seeing him so disgusted that tears were about to flow down, Li Yi secretly sighed. He had eaten the noodles just now for nothing. When seeing the big man, the little girl's face turned pale and she quickly ran behind the woman. The woman's face was pale. She looked at the big man and said in a trembling voice, "Master Hu, didn't we just pay this morning? Why? Stop talking nonsense." The big man impatiently waved his hand and said, "This is my territory. I can collect whenever I want and however many times I want. If your noodle stall wants to continue operating here, then give me the money." Li Yi looked at this scene in surprise. The security in the capital of the country was actually so bad under the emperor's feet? How could the people collecting protection fees be so brazen? If this was in Qing Prefecture, which ruffian would dare to be so arrogant? They would have been beaten half to death by Lu Yi. Ever since he discovered the dark phenomenon of collecting protection fees in the city, under Li Yi's instigation, Lu Yi had thoroughly reorganized the ruffians and idlers in the city. He invited them to the county office for tea for a few days, and after that, there were no more cases of protection fees. Instead, a group of burly men could often be seen picking up trash on the streets. The hygiene of the city had immediately improved a lot. It was said that the magistrate had specially praised County Magistrate Lu for this and listed him as a role model for other counties to learn from. The woman said with a bitter face, "Master Hu, I really don't have any money. You took all the money this morning. We only did business with a few customers this morning. We really don't have any money." "No money, let me see." The burly man called Tiger Lord kicked over the table in front of him and jumped inside. He picked up a worn-out wooden box on the ground. After opening it, he picked out a few copper coins from inside and casually threw the wooden box on the ground. He said, "Damn, it's my bad luck to have met a poor ghost like you." Lu Rui frowned. Just as she was about to walk over, she stopped in her tracks when she saw an officer patrolling the streets not far away. "What are you doing?" Seeing the patrol officer walking over from afar, the man waved his hand and said, "Brother Song, it's nothing. Do what you need to do. I'll treat you to a drink tonight. Don't go overboard." The patrol officer said, waved his hand and turned to leave. Li Yi was dumbfounded. Was this really the capital city? Could the collusion between officials and bandits be more obvious? No wonder the woman did not look happy when she saw the patrol officer walking over. Instead, she turned even paler. It turned out that the officials were in cahoots with the people collecting protection fees. The man took the copper coin, cursed inwardly, and was about to leave. However, someone would not let him leave so quickly. Li Xian's eyes seemed to be spewing fire. He kicked the man away. A long time ago, Li Yi knew that while he looked gentle and weak on the surface, he was actually quite skilled. At that time, when he had forcefully dragged him to Ningguang Fu, he had no power to resist at all. Who the F***ck? The man was quite powerful. He got up from the ground in a roll and cursed. Before he turned around, he was sent flying again. Li Xian pinched his nose. He did not want to go near that guy anymore. He waved his hand and retreated to Li Yi's side. Most of the time, Li Yi wondered if he had a split personality. When he was serious, he could be elegant and polite, making it impossible for anyone to find fault with him. But when he was hedonistic, he was the standard spoiled brat, swaggering through the streets with a bunch of lackeys. With just a wave of his hand, 2 guards would walk over and trample on the man like a human sandbag. Seeing the elegant young master suddenly become so fierce, the overlord of this generation, Master Hu, could only hug his head and beg for mercy. The woman's mouth was wide open, and she could not come back to her senses for a while. The little girl clutched the corner of her mother's clothes tightly. Tears was still hanging in the corner of her eyes. She stared blankly at the man rolling on the ground and clenched her fists. Chapter 319. Li Xian's face was extremely pale. He held onto the wall with one hand and occasionally retched a few times. Li Yi believed that he wasn't being so cruel to that Tiger Lord, because he wanted to help the weak. When he ate until his stomach was round, the first thing he smelled was the pungent smell. It was already good enough that he didn't vomit out his gallbladder. That bastard, how many months had it been since he washed his feet? "Young master, you can't hit him, you can't hit him." The woman rushed out of the noodle shop with a panicked expression. Li Yi looked at the woman and asked with a frown, "How can there be such ruffians in the capital? Don't the officials care?" "You can't hit him, you really can't hit him." The woman was flustered and hurriedly said, "Young masters, you should leave this place quickly. When the officials come, you won't be able to leave. These ruffians were only robbing some copper coins. How could they compare to the officials? If they fell into the hands of the officials, they would lose their lives." The anger on Li Xian's face was difficult to quell. He coldly said, "I really don't plan on leaving today. I want to see what they can do to me." Because of the special status of the members of the royal family, their every action represented the face of the royal family. Thus, the royal family had very strict restrictions on them. They absolutely couldn't bully the commoners. Otherwise, the censor's impeachment would definitely fly to the emperor's desk like snowflakes. Of course, although they couldn't bully others, they couldn't be bullied by others either. Bullying the kind-hearted members of the royal family would at most be punished. Bullying the royal family wasn't a big crime. At most they would be beheaded. Seeing that the young master in front of her was determined, the woman's expression became even more anxious. This noble was obviously of extraordinary birth, but how could he be compared to that huge monster? She couldn't drag him down. "You two stop." Two loud shouts came from not far away. Several patrolling bailiffs quickly ran over. Without the crown prince's orders, the two guards wouldn't stop. The fact that the person who offended the crown prince could still scream in pain was simply a humiliation to them. With this thought in mind, the two of them exerted more strength in their hands and feet. Which thug dares to commit murder in the middle of the street? Stop right now, or don't blame us for being impolite. The leader of the group was the constable with the surname Song, whom they had just met. Before he even walked over, he had already heard the classic sayings of a constable. Clang! The 5 bailiffs drew their swords and surrounded the two of them. "Stop." Li Xian walked over and said calmly. Only then did the 2 guards stop and turn around to look at the bailiffs who had surrounded them. "Who are you?" Constable Song asked. He knew that the person in front of him was the most important person in this group. Li Xian said coldly, "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that this bully is doing evil in the street. As an official, why don't you do anything and let him bully this mother and son?" When Constable Song heard this, he felt extremely depressed. This motherfastrous cur was just another busybody. If Wang Hu dared to do this to anyone else, he would have been arrested and sent to the government office to have his legs broken. However, the He mother and son were not on that list. The higher-ups had already instructed them to turn a blind eye to their affairs. All the ruffians on the street knew that they could come here to withdraw money when they needed it. As long as they didn't go overboard, the government wouldn't do anything to them. "Humph, with which eye did you see them being bullied?" Constable Song also snorted and said, "I only saw the two of you committing murder in the middle of the street. It was a very bad influence. Come with us to the government office." At the side, Li Yi finally noticed something different. This group of bailiffs and the group of bullies lying on the ground were obviously targeting the mother and son, and they must have some backing. In a place like the capital, there were countless pairs of eyes watching everything you did. If you saw a young master coming out of a brothel on the street, he would either be the only son of a prime minister or the heir of a duke's family. If Constable Song was so arrogant to everyone, he wouldn't have survived until now. However, this time, it was obvious that he had made a mistake. Constable Song didn't think that he had made a mistake. The waters of the capital were very deep. Unlike in other places, where even a small bailiff could do as he pleased in the countryside, in this place where nobility was everywhere and anyone he picked was a relative of the emperor, he naturally had to be careful. Otherwise, he might lose his head one day. Therefore, Constable Song was very clear about those people who couldn't be provoked. He even had a small booklet to record their names and pay attention to them on a daily basis. He also knew what they looked like. Of course, this person in front of him wasn't one of them. In fact, there were many people like this who were nosy before. However, when he realized that the county magistrate didn't even give face to a marquis, he knew what kind of backing they had. "I'm the one who got you into trouble." The woman's face was pale. In the end, there was only bitterness left on her face. In fact, when Master Hu appeared at the noodle stall, many heads popped out from the shops on the street. They secretly cursed in their hearts. They didn't know who this lady from the He family had offended, but all the bullies on the street picked on her and bullied her. It wasn't easy for her to get to where she was after so many years. This time, she might not be able to keep the money she earned from selling the noodle. However, things didn't develop as they usually did. Wang Hu was kicked away by the thin and weak young master. He was punched and kicked like a dead dog. The young master was in big trouble now that the constables were here. In the past, there were also people who wanted to help the lady from the He family, but they all ended up in a miserable state. I really want to see which way the main gate of the capital county government opens. Li Xian stopped the guard from revealing his identity. He crossed his arms and said with interest, "The constables didn't treat them as ordinary people. After all, they didn't take the county government seriously. They must be people of high status. They might not be able to offend the person who caused trouble for the He family, but they definitely could afford to offend Constable Song. As a result, a strange scene appeared on the street. A group of people walked in the direction of the county government. The two young masters in front were strolling leisurely, talking and laughing. The woman behind them was holding the little girl's hand. Her face was pale. A few constables followed behind as if they were escorting them. It was often said that it was difficult to be an official in the capital city. Those who were officials in the capital city were all outstanding among the country's officials. They were the true pillars of the country. It was not an exaggeration to say that they brought honor to their ancestors. Of course, this did not include the county magistrate of the capital city. Although the county magistrate of the capital city was the county magistrate in name, he was still under the rule of the emperor. His rank was very high, equivalent to or even slightly higher than the magistrate of the other provinces. However, no matter how high his rank was, it couldn't hide the awkward status of the county magistrate of the capital city. The reason was simple. The capital city was the capital of a country. It was where the imperial city was located. There were countless princes and nobles. From the beginning to the end of the street, there were several officials who had a higher rank than the county magistrate. Chen Yu was such a good-for-nothing county magistrate. He was just over 40 years old and had a lot of white hair on his temples. It had been 3 years since he was promoted to the county magistrate of the capital city. At this time, Chen Yu was worried about a case. The young master of the Duke of Zhao Kingdom and the young master of the Duke of Wei fought over a girl in a brothel. The guards of the two families teamed up and tore down the brothel. Now he had to decide which of the two was guilty. How the hell was he supposed to decide? No matter which one it was, he couldn't afford to offend them. The only thing he could do was to smooth things over. As for the brothel, it was the bad luck of the madam. Just as he was feeling vexed, a constable came to report that there was a new case. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.